Chapter 884. Yi Xing and the other three destroyed the five-colored light barrier as easily as crushing dry weeds. It didn't take long for them to arrive outside the five-colored light barrier. Bah, 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 bah. The attacks of the four landed on the five-colored light shield one after another, causing a series of explosions. Something strange happened. Under the attacks of Yi Xing and the other three, the formation could not withstand a single blow. However, the five-colored light barrier rippled and blocked the attacks of the four people. Even Yi Xing's arrow attack was blocked and could not penetrate it. Star Silver Death stood in the sky above Xingxiang Palace, looking at Yi Xing and the other three through the translucent five-colored light shield. He snorted. "I have said that you will never be able to break through my Xingxiang Palace. This five elements heaven ceiling formation is a complete level 6 formation. It is a treasure that the founder of my sect obtained from the Dark Star continent. It can withstand the attack of a quasi-god third nirvana. It has been guarding the center of the palace and can ensure that my Xingxiang Palace will exist forever in the Starry Crescent land. You will not be able to break through this formation." Feng Hanqiu frowned. A complete level 6 formation was too difficult to deal with. It had already exceeded the limits of the Starry Crescent land. In the Starry Crescent land, the cultivation of a martial artist could only reach the level of a quasi-god third nirvana. The imperial dragon luck that they had accumulated was also at the peak of a quasi-god third nirvana. Under normal circumstances, a formation that could withstand a quasi-god third nirvana was indeed impossible to break through in the Starry Crescent land. However, this was not a normal situation. Yi Xing and Wei Qingxian were not from the Starry Crescent land. Yi Xing's strength had exceeded the martial arts limits of the Starry Crescent land. However, with Yi Xing's quasi-god third nirvana level attack, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through the five elements heaven ceiling formation. Even a quasi-god fourth nirvana would need a certain amount of time to break through a level 6 formation. If the array was supplied with energy, it would be even more difficult to break the array. Inside the five-colored light shield, Star Silver Death sneered and continued. This formation uses the primordial chi of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth as its energy source. When we first established this formation, our founder left behind a method to gather the primordial chi of five elements. After more than 78,000 years of accumulation, the amount of primordial chi of five elements that we have gathered is beyond your imagination. You want to exhaust the formation's energy to break it? You can attack it for 100 years or even 1,000 years, but you won't be able to break it. Feng Hanqiu looked at Yi Xing anxiously. What should we do? If the five-element sky seal formation had enough power to last for thousands of years, then it would be unbreakable. Just like Star Silver Death had said, it would be a competition to see who could live longer. Yi Xing, on the other hand, was confident and composed. He looked at Feng Hanqiu and smiled. "It doesn't matter. Even if I can't break it by force now, I'll definitely be able to break it when I become a 9-star king. However, who said that one must break the array by force?" Feng Hanqiu's eyes lit up and his face lit up. "Oh, Junior Brother Arrow Emperor knows about arrays?" Wei Qingxian smiled. Yi Xing's attainments in arrays are not low. More importantly, his eye technique can see through everything. No array can hide anything from him. If there is a flaw, it won't escape Yi Xing's eyes. Yi Xing smiled and nodded. He activated the God Voidbreaker Eye, and a third eye opened in the center of his forehead. The God Voidbreaker Eye's gaze instantly pierced through the void. The structure of the five-element sky seal formation was clearly visible under the God Voidbreaker Eye. Yi Xing understood it clearly. Yi Xing carefully examined the structure of the five-element sky seal formation. He was secretly surprised that he couldn't find a flaw in this array. It was a level 6 array. The killing array could kill quasi-gods, the defensive array could defend against quasi-gods, and the trapping array could trap quasi-gods. It wasn't simple at all. Yi Xing also found a few weak points in the array. However, this five-element sky seal formation contained the five elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The five elements were clearly separated on the surface, but they were actually connected. No matter which part of the formation was attacked, the attack would immediately be directed to the five elements of the light shield and shared. Therefore, even if there was a weak point in the array, it was impossible to penetrate the defense of the five elements of the light shield in one strike. Moreover, the five-element sky seal formation circulated the five elements of the formation and had a self-healing effect. If it couldn't be broken in one strike, the circulating five elements of the formation would immediately heal the damaged area. Only a quasi-god for Nirvana level of attack could possibly break this array if they attacked continuously. A quasi-god 3 Nirvana level of attack would have a slim chance of breaking the array unless the array's energy was insufficient. However, even if the chances were slim, they still had to give it a try. After all, Yi Xing's archery contained extremely terrifying penetrative power. Its lethality was much more terrifying than that of an ordinary quasi-god 3 Nirvana level of attack. Yi Xing once again drew the green sandalwood divine bow and activated the gray flame void-destroying arrow technique. A pale flame arrow formed and targeted a weak point in the array where the 5 elements of the formation circulated slowly. At this moment, Yi Xing was the focus of everyone's attention. Wei Qingxian, Feng Hanqiu, and Feng Juanyue's eyes were filled with anticipation. However, Star Silver Death and Xingyihong's eyes were slightly worried. They were afraid that something would go wrong because the 5-element sky seal formation was their last resort. Whoosh, the arrow left the bowstring and instantly pierced through the void. Everyone's attention shifted from Yi Xing to the flaming arrow at the same time. Everyone's eyes were filled with anticipation. On one hand, they hoped that the flame arrow could break the array, and on the other hand, they hoped that the array light shield could block the arrow. Boom, in the blink of an eye, the flame arrow collided with the 5-color array light shield, causing a loud explosion. Yi Xing's arrow was an all-out attack. Its power was much more terrifying than the previous one. The tip of the arrow pierced through the surface of the 5-colored light shield and pierced into it. Unfortunately, the 5-colored light shield had 5 layers of defense. The 5 elements of the primordial qi circulated, and the penetrative power was quickly diverted away. In the end, the arrow only penetrated 3 layers of defense before it could no longer move forward. The surging flame energy exploded, and its power erupted instantly. It broke through another layer of defense, but the last layer of defense was still unshakable. This was Yi Xing's most powerful attack, and the attack was aimed at the weakest point of the array. However, it still couldn't break the array in one strike. The 5 elements of the primordial qi circulated, and the 4 layers of defense that had been broken through were restored in the blink of an eye. Wei Qingxian and the others were disappointed. However, Star Silver Death was overjoyed. He felt relieved. Star Silver Death chuckled. Yi Xing, how's the defensive power of the 5 elements heaven sealing formation? You've already used your most powerful attack, right? Unfortunately, it's still not enough. This array is maintained by an endless stream of 5 elements of primordial qi. If you can't break it with one strike, I won't be able to break it even if I give you 1,000 years. Although Xingxiang Palace was only left with a radius of 100 miles, the central area was only protected by the 5 elements heaven sealing formation. As a member of Xingxiang Palace, this should be a shameful thing. However, Star Silver Death was inexplicably happy to see Yi Xing being defeated by the 5 elements heaven sealing formation. Today, I have a lot of work to do at my relative's house. I only wrote 2 chapters for now. I'll work hard tomorrow when I return to Shenyang. Chapter 885. Star Silver Death's words reminded Yi Xing that if the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation wanted to protect Xingxiang Palace, it needed an endless supply of 5 elemental yuan qi. The 5 elemental heaven sealing formation was extremely difficult to break because the 5 elemental yuan qi was too dense. Without it, the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation's power would be greatly reduced. Even now, Yi Xing could rely on his extreme penetrative power to break through 4 layers of defense. As long as the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation's power was weakened, it wouldn't be difficult to break through. Yi Xing lowered his head and used his God Voidbreaker Eye to look underground. Not even the dirt and sand could obstruct the God Voidbreaker Eye's vision. Soon, Yi Xing could see the entire underground of the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation. The scene underground caused Yi Xing's eyes to light up, and his lips curled into a smile. 100 li below Xingxiang Palace, there were 5 enormous elemental yuan qi pools arranged in a pentagram. Each elemental yuan qi pool was about 30 li long, 30 li wide, and 30 li high. They were set up with an array that gathered elemental yuan qi of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Each elemental yuan qi pool gathered one type of yuan qi. After tens of thousands of years of accumulation, the yuan qi in the 5 elemental yuan qi pools had reached a terrifying level. The yuan qi had condensed into yuan liquid, which in turn condensed into yuan crystals. Each elemental yuan qi pool was half a pool of yuan crystal and half a pool of yuan liquid. The yuan qi it contained was indeed enough to support the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation against Quasi-God San Nirvana's attacks for 1,000 years. However, if Quasi-God San Nirvana didn't attack the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation and instead directly destroyed the elemental yuan qi pools, the result would be different. As long as the elemental yuan qi pools were destroyed, the 5 elemental heaven-sealing formation would lose its source of power. It wouldn't take long for quasi-god San Nirvana to forcefully break through the 5 elemental heaven-sealing formation. Wei Qingxian, who had been paying attention to Yixing, immediately noticed the change in Yixing's expression and asked, "Yixing, do you have a solution?" Feng Hanqiu and Feng Junue immediately looked at Yixing, their eyes filled with hope. Yixing nodded. "It's not difficult to break this formation." Feng Hanqiu looked excited. "How do we break the array?" Inside the 5 elemental heaven-sealing formation, Star Silver Death's expression changed slightly. Yixing's words made him feel a trace of fear. However, Star Silver Death was still very confident in the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation left behind by the founder of Celestial Elephant Palace. He immediately calmed his mind. Star Silver Death sneered. "You think it's easy to break the formation? Yixing, go ahead and attack. I want to see what kind of ability you have that you dare to speak so arrogantly and attempt to break the formation." Yixing drew the green sandalwood divine bow again, his eyes filled with confidence. Then watch carefully. A pale white flame arrow rapidly condensed and took shape. Yixing placed the azure sandalwood divine bow at the bottom of the bow. The arrow was not aimed at the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation ahead, but the ground outside the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation. Wei Qingxian, Feng Hanqiu and Feng Junue all looked puzzled. However, Star Silver Death's expression changed drastically inside the 5-colored light shield. Of course, Star Silver Death knew that the power source of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation was the 5 elements pool beneath the ground. However, the 5 elements pool was hundreds of miles underground. Even if someone cultivated an eye technique and had powerful eyesight that could see through 1 or 2 layers of objects, what kind of eye technique could see through hundreds of miles of dirt and sand? Star Silver Death had never heard of such an eye technique. However, Yixing's arrow was aimed at the ground of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation. This shocked Star Silver Death. Maybe, he's only guessing that the power source of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation is underground, and he hasn't really seen it, so he's just attacking randomly? Star Silver Death guessed. This was the only way he could feel relieved. If Yixing was just attacking randomly, Star Silver Death would be much calmer. The 5 elements pool was connected to the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation. It wouldn't be that easy to destroy it. If he attacked the 5 elements pool directly, no matter which pool it was, it would have the defensive power of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation. However, the connecting channels between the 5 elements pools were the weakest. Even a quasi-god of Nirvana 2 could break through it without the attack of a quasi-god of Nirvana 3. The 5 elements pools were connected by 5 channels, which formed a 5-pointed star. The 5 elements pools were the 5 corners of the 5-pointed star. Compared to the 5 elements pools, which were 30 miles in length, width, and height, the 5 connecting channels were very small. They were only about 1 meter in diameter. If he attacked randomly, it was unlikely that he would be able to hit the connecting channels that were only 1 meter in diameter. However, the reality was the exact opposite of what Star Silver Death had guessed. The 5 connecting passages could be said to be the 5 flaws of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation. Yixing's void-breaking god eyes could see them clearly. The target of the flaming arrow was also locked onto one of the connecting passages. Whoosh! Yixing released the bowstring. The flaming arrow left the bowstring instantly and shot into the ground. The resistance of the ground was more than 10 times stronger than that of air. However, the flaming arrow's penetrative power was terrifying. It only took 1 breath for it to travel 100 miles underground. The flaming arrow made a turn underground, bypassing the defense above the 5 elements pool. It shot to the bottom of the 5 elements pool, then turned upward and shot into one of the connecting channels. The ground shook violently. The 5-colored light shield of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation shook violently. With one of the connecting channels broken, the balance between the 5 elements pools was broken. The 5 elements heaven-sealing formation was immediately affected. Wei Qingxian, Feng Hanqiu and Feng Junue were overjoyed. It seemed that Yixing's attack was very effective. In the 5-colored light shield, Star Silver Death's face turned pale instantly. He was controlling the formation. How could he not know that the balance of the 5 elements pool was broken? Beside him, Xing Yuehong's face was not any better. She looked anxious. If the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation was broken, Xingxiang Palace would be destroyed. She and Xing Yuehong would not be able to escape. Whoosh! Yixing's Sagittarius and Vermilion bird constellations appeared above his head. He held the azure sandalwood divine bow in his hand and used the azure flame void destroying arrow technique. He shot another arrow into the ground. The ground shook again. The five-colored light shield shook violently again. Another connecting channel was broken by the flaming arrow. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Yi Xing shot an arrow every 2 breaths. In just 10 breaths he shot 5 arrows consecutively. All the connecting channels between the 5 elements pools were destroyed. Rumble, the ground shook violently. With the 5 channels destroyed, the 5 elements pools lost their balance and began to collapse. The tremors were more than 10 times greater than before. Rays of light rushed out from the ground. They were white, green, black, red, and yellow. They represented the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth elements chi. The 5 elements pool was too rich. At this moment, the eruption created gullies that were hundreds of miles deep in the ground. The range of the 5 elements chi was hundreds of miles. The 5 elements heaven ceiling formation above suffered the greatest impact. It shook violently and seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Yi Xing and the other 3 retreated hundreds of miles away. They quietly watched the 5 elements chi erupt. In the 5-colored light shield, Xing Yuehong and Xing Yuehong's faces were pale. They were filled with despair. Chapter 888. Hearing how Wei Qingxian addressed him, Yi Xing immediately understood the identity of the blurry man in front of him. Wei Qingxuan's father was naturally reincarnation supremacy. Yi Xing had heard Wei Qingxian mention him many times, but he had never seen him. Although he didn't even see reincarnation supremacy's appearance clearly today, Yi Xing finally had an understanding of how terrifying a supremacy was. Wei Qingxian said happily, "Father, are you here to take us to Reincarnation Palace?" Reincarnation supremacy shook his head. "You? No. Xian, I'm here to take you. With your aptitude, you will be in great danger in a high-level continent. Only in Reincarnation Palace can I protect you." Wei Qingxian was stunned and grabbed Yi Xing's hand. "Yi Xing and I are together. How can I leave Yi Xing alone? Father, take Yi Xing to Reincarnation Palace too. His aptitude is very good, and his strength is even stronger than Xian Er's." Yi Xing also held Wei Qingxuan's hand tightly. He had never felt that there would be any obstacles between him and Wei Qingxian, but now he realized that Wei Qingxian was the daughter of a supremacy. Reincarnation supremacy might not take a fancy to a little genius king like him. Many true god experts had appeared in the Dark Star continent, but no one had ever heard of a true god becoming a supremacy. It could be seen that even a true god expert was nothing in the eyes of a supremacy. Yi Xing was an 8-star emperor, but he had the strength of a second nirvana quasi-god. It was indeed heaven-defying. If a true god expert knew about it, they would have to look at him in a new light. However, it was far from enough to catch the eye of a supremacy. As Yi Xing expected, reincarnation supremacy glanced at him. He felt that his whole body was seen through, but reincarnation supremacy didn't show any special expression. 5-star blue fate, vermilion bird constellation, proficient in archery, has the blood essence of a true god of archery in his body, and also has a rank 6 fire seed. His combat power is no weaker than a 1 nirvana quasi-god. Except for the Sagittarius constellation and the Black Hole constellation, everything about Yi Xing was revealed by reincarnation supremacy. He will be a supreme expert among the quasi-gods in the future, but it will be difficult for him to become a true god. His achievements will be limited. Xianer, his aptitude is worlds apart from yours. He is not worthy of you. To the reincarnation supremacy, even a true god was nothing. However, to be able to become the strongest among the quasi-gods, one's achievements were indeed limited. In the Reincarnation Palace, there were a lot of true gods and countless quasi-gods. There was no difference between having a supreme expert among the quasi-gods and not having one. Seeing that reincarnation supremacy looked down on Yi Xing, Wei Qingxian immediately became anxious. "Father, you are wrong. Yi Xing has the paramount constellation and has the strength to kill a second nirvana quasi-god. Yi Xing's potential is not inferior to Xian Er's. Furthermore, Xian Er has already become partners with Yi Xing. Father, don't separate us." Reincarnation supremacy said, "Xian Er, I sent you to a lower continent to let you experience the difficulties of martial arts, not to let you fall in love. Your mother lost her life to save you. I need you to focus on martial arts and become a supremacy. Only then can you join hands with me to save your mother's life. He is only a 5-star blue fate, and it will be difficult for him to become a true god in the future. His lifespan is only a few thousand years. Even if he has the paramount constellation, what's the use? As for you, if you become a true god, you will have a lifespan of 30,000 years. If you become a supremacy, your lifespan will be eternal. At that time, what kind of partner can't you find?" With a wave of reincarnation supremacy's hand, Yi Xing and Wei Qingxian separated. Yi Xing wanted to move but he couldn't. He wanted to speak but he couldn't open his mouth. The supremacy's methods were mysterious. Now, apart from being able to see and think, he was no different from a statue. Wei Qingxian saw this and said in shock, "Father, what did you do to Yi Xing? My heart already belongs to him. Even if I have a long lifespan, I won't like anyone else. Yi Xing and I have a promise to reach the peak of martial arts and become supremacies together. Father, don't hurt him." Become supremacies together? Reincarnation supremacy seemed to be moved and laughed. Does he really have such ambitions? Wei Qingxian nodded. Yi Xing found that the shackles on his body had disappeared and nodded again and again. Reincarnation supremacy said, "Young man, becoming a supremacy is not something that can be done with words. You have built a top-grade imperial body and have a supreme celestial form. You do have the qualifications to become a supremacy, but your chances of becoming a true god are not high. Becoming a supremacy, hee. Do you know how many true gods have wanted to become a supremacy since ancient times, but they couldn't take this step?" Yi Xing said, "If there is a will, there is a way. Whether it can be done or not, we will only know if we persevere. Senior, this junior doesn't ask Senior to take me to the Reincarnation Palace, but I beg Senior to tell me the location of the Reincarnation Palace and how to get there. In the future, I will go there with my own ability. At that time, Senior will not stop me in Qingxian." There were only 3 high-level continents in the flowing light world. The Dark Star Temple, the Radiance Temple, and the Star River Temple were the 3 strongest forces. The Reincarnation Palace was definitely not in the flowing light world. It was unknown how far it was from here. Yi Xing had become a 9-star king. He could go to the Heavenly Bao continent and obtain Luo Qinggong's inheritance. He could enter the Star Secret Realm and explore the treasures left behind by the Star Supremacy. If Reincarnation Supremacy took him to the Reincarnation Palace now, it would be difficult for him to come back. Therefore, Yi Xing was unwilling to be taken away by Reincarnation Supremacy. Ha 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 ha. Reincarnation Supremacy laughed. He pointed his hand and a message shot into Yi Xing's mind. "Young man, you talk big. However, it's not that easy to go to the Reincarnation Palace. If you can really go there with your own ability, I will do as you say and allow you to interact with Xian-er. Xian-er, let's go." As soon as Reincarnation Supremacy finished speaking, he waved his hand. His and Wei Qingxuan's figures gradually turned illusory. They left the space passage and disappeared. "Yi Xing, I'll wait for you." Only Wei Qingxuan's voice was still echoing. Whoosh. As soon as Reincarnation Supremacy left, the space passage immediately returned to its normal state. The still void torrent moved instantly and traveled hundreds of millions of miles in a breath. Yi Xing moved forward with the void torrent, but his mind was focused on the message left behind by Reincarnation Supremacy. As Yi Xing expected, the Reincarnation Palace was indeed not in the flowing light world. It was located in the center of the Reincarnation region, the Reincarnation world. This world was made up of many worlds. It was called the Black Cloud world. In the Black Cloud world, one person had 3,000 worlds. The flowing light world was only one of the 3,000 worlds. There were more than 200 worlds nearby that belonged to the Reincarnation region. The Reincarnation Palace was the most powerful force in the Reincarnation region. It was called the Reincarnation Holy Land. Reincarnation Supremacy was the most powerful person in the Reincarnation region. In the Reincarnation region, every world had a teleportation formation that led to the Reincarnation world. However, the distance between the worlds was extremely far. It was countless times farther than the distance between the continents in the starry sky. The space passage formed by the teleportation formation was very chaotic. Only real God experts could withstand it. Therefore, if one wanted to leave the world through the teleportation formation, one must at least have the strength of a real God expert. Chapter 889. The Strength of a True God Expert. Yi Xing sighed inwardly. His current strength was stronger than a second Nirvana quasi-god, but his attack power was only at the level of a third Nirvana quasi-god. However, if he really fought with a third Nirvana quasi-god, he would definitely lose. After all, strength was not only in terms of attack power but also in terms of defense, reaction, and so on. The difference in strength between each realm of quasi-god was huge, especially between a sixth Nirvana quasi-god and a true god expert. It was like a natural chasm. Yi Xing still had a long way to go to reach the level of a true god. Not long after, Yi Xing reached the end of the space passage and was repelled by the void torrent. He appeared in the sky above a 10,000-foot tall mountain. He had arrived at the Dark Star continent. Yixing looked back and could not see the space passage. Even with his god eye of void piercing, he could only see a tiny point in space. This was a space passage that could only be entered but not returned. Unless one had the strength of a true god expert, one could break the rules and travel in reverse between the starry star continents. Qingxian, wait for me. I will definitely go to the Samsara Palace to find you. Wei Qingshuan's figure flashed across Yixing's mind. The god eye of void piercing pierced through the void. Yixing confirmed the direction, and the azure cloud wings appeared on his back as he sped away. The Dark Star continent was more than 10 times larger than the Starry Crescent land. It was extremely vast. The last time he went from the Starry Crescent land to the Dark Star continent, he took the void-crossing divine boat, which could teleport tens of thousands of miles in a breath. That was why he could reach the Dark Star Temple so quickly. Yixing did not have such speed. If he wanted to go to the Dark Star Temple, he had to use the nearby transmission formation. About 1,000,000 miles away, Yixing saw a huge city and flew toward it at a speed of 1,000 miles in a breath. A little more than 15 minutes later, Yixing arrived at the big city called Shui City. Shui City was vast, with a radius of 10,000 miles. Other than the 3,000 miles around the center of the city that was protected by a formation, the rest of the area was not protected by a formation. Yixing flew directly into the sky above Shui City, heading towards the teleportation hall in the city. Stop. As soon as Yixing entered Shui City, a loud roar could be heard. A 9-star martial monarch flew out from somewhere in the city and blocked Yixing's path. Yixing stopped more than 100 miles away and asked, "What's the matter?" In the sky above Shui City, other than the Central Region's array formation, there were also other cultivators flying. It was clear that Shui City did not prohibit flying. Yixing asked himself if he had violated any city rules. The 9-star Great Emperor looked greedily at the azure cloud wings on Yixing's back. What a great flying artifact. It can actually allow an 8-star monarch's speed to reach such a level. He's much faster than an ordinary quasi-god. Yixing snorted. The other party was actually coveting his azure cloud wings and wanted him to stop. The 9-star martial monarch shifted his gaze from the blue cloud wings to Yixing's face and asked, "Who are you?" Yixing coldly glanced at the other party. "What does it have to do with you?" The 9-star martial monarch chuckled. "I am Shui Meng, a member of the Shui family in Shui City. Master Shui has taken a fancy to your flying artifact. I'll give you 100,000 high-grade crystals." "Not for sale." Yixing spat out 2 words. He turned into a ray of light and instantly went around Shui Meng. Shui Meng was furious. "Stop right there." Yixing arrived above the teleportation hall in a few breaths. He descended and treated Shui Meng, who was chasing behind him, as air. Entering the teleportation hall, Yixing handed over 100,000 high-grade crystals and immediately ordered, "Teleport to the Dark Star Divine Palace." The Dark Star Divine Palace was the strongest force in the Dark Star continent. The Dark Star dynasty behind it ruled the entire Dark Star continent. Hearing this, the array master in the hall did not dare to delay and quickly adjusted the array formation. At this moment, Shui Meng arrived at the teleportation hall and barged in aggressively. "Master Shui asked you to stop and you still dare to run? Do you want to die?" The moment he entered the teleportation hall, Shui Meng's figure flashed and rushed toward Yixing. As he spoke, he threw a punch at Yixing's face. Boom! The void trembled and the air exploded. The martial artists in the teleportation hall were shocked. However, when they saw that the one who threw the punch was Shui Meng, they were enlightened. The Shui family was the ruler of Shui City. Shui Meng was only a martial monarch and not a quasi-god, but he was a direct descendant of the Shui family. He was the son of a direct descendant of the Shui family. In Shui City, even a quasi-god would not dare to offend this master. However, the array master who adjusted the array formation for Yixing knew that Yixing was going to the Dark Star Divine Palace. He probably had a powerful background. "Master Shui." They wanted to warn Shui Meng, but it was too late. Just as they spoke, Shui Meng's fist had already reached Yixing's face. A mere 9-star martial monarch dared to be so arrogant in front of him. Yixing snorted and pointed a finger. The finger was like an arrow, instantly hitting Shui Meng's fist. The energy around the fist was penetrated by the arrow, and the sharp arrow pierced his fist. Shui Meng immediately felt a sharp pain as if he had been electrocuted. With a miserable groan, his fist went limp. Bang! At this time, Yixing kicked out. The energy footprint hit Shui Meng's stomach, and Shui Meng was immediately sent flying out of the teleportation hall. A breath later, Shui Meng rushed in again. He pointed at Yi Xing and shouted, "You dare to attack me in Shui City?" Yi Xing's gaze was sharp. "Oh, you're a little 9-star martial monarch. Could it be that you're the king of Shui City? You don't even care about the Dark Star Divine Palace?" Dark Star Divine Palace? Shui Meng was stunned. Yi Xing wasn't wearing the Dark Star Divine Palace's disciple robe, so he didn't think that Yi Xing was a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace. The Dark Star Divine Palace had only recently recruited disciples 15 years ago. It was impossible for a new disciple to reach the 8th level of Astral Sea Realm so quickly. If it was an old disciple who had a flying divine tool, he definitely wouldn't be an ordinary disciple. He should have cultivated for more than 100 years and shouldn't still be in the 8th level of Astral Sea Realm. Shui Meng had secretly judged that Yi Xing wasn't a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace, which was why he dared to target the Azure Cloud Wings. However, he didn't know that Yi Xing was an exception among the outer disciples of the Dark Star Divine Palace. He had been in the Dark Star Divine Palace for 15 years, but he had only stayed in the Dark Star Divine Palace for a year. After that, he had traveled to several space continents and outer space continents. Fortuitous encounters came one after another. In just 15 years he had already reached the 8th level of Astral Sea Realm. Shui Meng said angrily, "Are you trying to scare Master Meng? What kind of Dark Star Divine Palace disciple are you?" As he spoke, Shui Meng looked at the array master who was adjusting Yi Xing's array. Stop for Master Meng. Don't let this brat go. When my Shui family's quasi-god arrives, we'll make him suffer." Yi Xing took out the Dark Star Divine Palace's disciple token. "Your Shui City's Shui family doesn't put the Dark Star Divine Palace in your eyes?" The Shui family had Shui Nan, a true god expert. As an inner elder of the Dark Star Divine Palace, they were indeed a prominent force in the Dark Star continent. However, even so, the Shui family was only an ordinary 5-star family. There was a world of difference between them and the Dark Star Divine Palace. How would the Shui family's disciples dare to look down on the Dark Star Divine Palace's disciples? After taking out the token, Yi Xing's identity was naturally confirmed. Shui Meng left dejectedly. Yi Xing returned to the Dark Star Divine Palace through the teleportation array. Chapter 890. In the Dark Star Divine Palace, Yi Xing returned to the 10th peak. 15 years had passed, and many of the outer disciples had become 4-star kings. Some were even 5-star kings and had become inner disciples. Most of the outer disciples had become 3-star kings. Only half of them were left. The disciples from the Starry Crescent land who were originally 2-star and 3-star kings had all broken through to become inner disciples. Even Feng Xiaoxiao, who was originally an 8-star king, had broken through to become a 4-star king 3 years ago and became an inner disciple. Mo Qingyang, the peak master of the 10th peak, met Yi Xing. Good. You are indeed the top disciple of the 10th peak. Since you have not returned from the Heavenly Bao continent, I knew that you had obtained Luo Tiangong's treasure and would have a bright future. I did not expect you to become an 8-star king in just 15 years. You really surprised me. Among all the outer disciples of the 10th peak, Zhuo Fifan from the 7th peak had the fastest cultivation breakthrough. However, he is only a 6-star king now. Although more than half of the outer disciples of the 10th peak had become inner disciples, none of them had become advanced kings. However, Yi Xing was an 8-star king. In comparison, Yi Xing's cultivation was indeed special. He had improved at a godly speed. More importantly, the other disciples were all cultivating in the Dark Star Divine Palace. They had returned from the Heavenly Bao continent with a large number of contribution points and abundant resources. Yi Xing's cultivation had improved so quickly in the Starry Crescent land, which was a low-level continent, and then in the Starry Crescent land, which was a middle-level continent. As the peak master of the 10th peak, Mo Qingyang was, of course, happy that Yi Xing had come out of the 10th peak. He personally brought Yi Xing to the inner disciples. In the future, when Yi Xing achieved something, he, the peak master of the 10th peak, would also be proud. The inner disciples of the Dark Star Divine Palace were much more complicated than the outer disciples. The outer disciples would recruit disciples from the Dark Star land every 50 years and from the middle-level continents every 100 years. Once these outer disciples became 4-star kings, they would be transferred to the inner disciples. Batches after batches of outer disciples transferred to the inner disciples. Only a small number of them became quasi-gods and became core disciples. The rest stayed in the inner disciples. Everyone under 1,000 years old was a disciple. After 1,000 years of accumulation, there were 20 batches of outer sect disciples gathered in one place. Naturally, there were hundreds of thousands of people. After collecting the inner disciple identity card and clothes, Yixing asked Emo Qingyang, Peak Master Qingyang, is there a good place in the Dark Star Divine Palace where I can raise my cultivation quickly? Emo Qingyang knew that since Yixing had become an 8-star king at such a young age, he was definitely going to break through to the quasi-god realm. In the future he even wanted to break through to the true god realm. The earlier he broke through to quasi-god, the greater his potential and the greater his chances of becoming a true god in the future. Therefore, raising one's cultivation level was of utmost importance to martial artists. Emo Qingyang recommended a place to Yixing. Regarding the Dark Star Godly Palace, the Star Origin Pagoda is the best place to increase one's cultivation base. There is a level 7 energy gathering array at the bottom of the Star Origin Pagoda, which gathers the Star Origin Chi between heaven and earth into the Star Origin Pagoda. The first level of the Star Origin Pagoda can double the cultivation effect, the second level can double the cultivation effect, and the third level can triple the cultivation effect. Upon hearing this, Yixing was delighted. The third level of the Star Origin Pagoda is indeed very effective. Given the abundance of Star Origin Chi in the Dark Star continent, he would only need a dozen years to break through to the 9-star Great Emperor realm. If he could raise his cultivation effect by 3 times on the third level of the Star Origin Pagoda, he would only need 3 to 4 years to break through, which was enough to shorten the time by 10 years. Emo Qingyang chuckled, of course. However, the third level of the Star Origin Pagoda is not a place that anyone can enter as they wish. There is only one cultivation room on the third level, which can only sustain one person's cultivation. Yixing was surprised as he asked, only one person can cultivate? Then who should go? Emo Qingyang said, of course it should be the first inner disciple. This is the benefit of the first inner disciple. The first inner disciple can cultivate for a month. On the first day of every month, the other disciples can challenge the first inner disciple. The winner will be the new first and can enter the third level of the Star Origin Pagoda to cultivate. On the first day of the next month, they will have to accept challenges from other disciples. The first inner disciple was a 9th level Astral Sea Realm cultivator. No matter how strong he was and how unrivaled he was among the kings, Yixing was confident that he could defeat him. Yixing's expression became restless. The first day of every month? There are still 3 days before the first day of the next month. I have to give it a try. Emo Qingyang said, there are many inner disciples. It is not easy to stand out. The first level of the Star Origin Pagoda can accommodate 1 person, the second level can accommodate 10 people, and the third level can accommodate 100 people. Only the top 101st will be qualified to cultivate in the Star Origin Pagoda. When Yixing was at the 9th star Venerate Lord, he defeated a 3-star king and became the first disciple of the 10th peak. Emo Qingyang knew that Yixing was very strong and had the ability to challenge those of a higher cultivation level. However, most of the outer disciples from the last 20 batches of inner disciples were stuck at the 9-star king level and had yet to become a quasi-god. They had been stuck at the 9-star king level for a long time, some for 100 years and some for a few hundred years. It was difficult for their cultivation to improve, so they could only improve their strength. Those who could rank among the top among the hundreds of thousands of inner disciples all had extraordinary strength. It was not an exaggeration to say that even the 100th inner disciple was far stronger than an ordinary 9-star peak king. On the Dark Star continent, many 9-star kings were at the top of their peers. However, when compared to the inner court disciples of the Dark Star Temple, they were no match for the inner court disciples who were ranked 100th in the inner court. As for the top 10 inner disciples, they were even stronger. They were unrivaled in the same cultivation level. Even if 10 9-star kings worked together, they would not be a match for them. Those who could rank first were even more terrifying. Those who could rank first among the hundreds of thousands of inner disciples were almost invincible except for quasi-gods. Even the top inner disciple of the Dark Star Temple had managed to defeat a quasi-god before. For example, the current temple master, the Divine Emperor, had ranked first among the inner disciples for a few years. He was so strong that even a second Nirvana quasi-god was no match for him. Many core disciples were embarrassed by him. Although Emo Qingyang knew that Yixing had outstanding ability to challenge those of a higher cultivation level, he did not expect that Yixing would become the top inner disciple. In his opinion, it was good enough that Yixing could enter the top 101 and cultivate in the Star Origin Pagoda. It would be best if he could enter the top 10. 3 days passed in a flash. There were too few people in the Dark Star Temple who knew Yixing. His addition did not cause any ripples. During these 3 days, Yi Xing met with Feng Xiaoxiao, Zhuo Fifan, and other familiar people and passed the days peacefully. On the first day of every month, all the disciples were qualified to challenge the disciples cultivating in the Star Origin Pagoda. Yi Xing issued a challenge to the current top inner disciple, Kong Peng. Chapter 891. On this day, the challenge platform of the Dark Star Temple was very lively. On the huge square, there were 9 challenge platforms where battles were going on at the same time. The first to start were the disciples on the 3rd floor of the Star Origin Pagoda, who were ranked 12th to 101st on the inner disciple ranking. They were challenged by other inner disciples. The 3rd floor of the Star Origin Pagoda had a total of 100 cultivation rooms. The disciples who challenged the 3rd floor were weaker than the disciples on the 1st and 2nd floors. Therefore, the number of challenges on the 3rd floor was the highest. However, although there were many challengers, only a few were able to win. Kings had cultivated for more than 100 years and their cultivation base was solidified. It was difficult for them to continue improving their strength. The disciples who could rank in the top 100 were all outstanding. The rest of the disciples were no match for them in the past and would find it difficult to be their match in the future. More than 2 hours later, the challenges on the 3rd floor were over. After hundreds of battles, more than 90% of the challengers were defeated. Only a few people successfully entered the top 101st to obtain the qualification to cultivate in the Star Origin Pagoda. With their aptitude, it was impossible for them to cross the Nirvana tribulation and become a quasi-god even if they cultivated normally for 1,000 years. However, cultivating in the Star Origin Pagoda was faster and there was still a glimmer of hope. Therefore, all the inner disciples were scrambling for the Star Origin Pagoda. After the challenges on the 3rd floor were over, it was time for the challenges on the 2nd floor. The disciples on the 2nd floor were ranked 2nd to 11th. Their strength was 1 level higher than the top 100 disciples. The number of disciples who dared to challenge them was much fewer. In total, only 7 disciples challenged the disciples on the 2nd floor. Moreover, these 7 disciples were the best among the disciples on the 3rd floor. They were in the top 20 on the inner disciple ranking. After 7 battles, only the 12th disciple won and replaced the 11th disciple to enter the 2nd floor of the Star Origin Pagoda. After the challenges on the 2nd floor were over, the disciples who were watching the battles instinctively left. In addition to the genius disciples of the previous batch who had become quasi-gods, the title of the first inner disciple fell on Kong Peng 10 years ago. In these 10 years, Kong Peng had faced countless challenges but had never been defeated. His strength was far beyond the 2nd disciple. In the entire inner sect, no one could compete with him. A few years ago, the top 10 disciples were brave enough to challenge Kong Peng. However, after repeated failures, they gave up. In the last 2 years, Kong Peng did not face a single challenge. Therefore, all the disciples instinctively thought that once the 2nd floor's challenge was over, the day's challenge would be over. A figure appeared on the stage. This person was dressed in black and looked to be in his 30s. He was tall and had a terrifying aura. Many inner court disciples exclaimed in surprise. The one who stepped onto the stage was actually the number 1 inner court disciple, Kong Peng. Kong Peng went up on stage. Didn't this mean that someone wanted to challenge him? Who was this person? All the inner disciples were guessing. Kong Peng's gaze swept across the disciples like a sharp knife. Yi Xing, who challenged me, show yourself. Yi Xing? When the inner disciples heard this name, they began to ponder over it, only to realize that they didn't recognize it. Yi Xing had only stayed on the 10th peak of the Dark Star Sacred Palace for a year, so the inner disciples didn't know him. Even the disciples who had entered the inner court from the outer court did not think of Yi Xing. After all, there had been no news of Yi Xing for 15 years. Moreover, the number 1 inner court disciple was extremely powerful. However, Zhuo Fifan, who had the highest cultivation after entering the inner court, was only a 6-star king. He hadn't stepped onto the stage of the inner court yet. Of course, they didn't realize that the Yi Xing that Kong Peng mentioned was the number 1 outer court disciple of the 10th peak, Yi Xing Wuxia. As soon as Kong Peng finished speaking, a figure flashed and appeared on the stage. It was Yi Xing. Seeing Yi Xing, all the disciples were surprised. They had never seen this inner court disciple before. Apparently he was a nobody. It was really shocking that he dared to challenge the number 1 inner court disciple, Kong Peng. As for the outer court disciples who had entered the inner court, many of them were elites who had entered the Heavenly Bao continent. They recognized Yi Xing and were even more shocked. Yi Xing had not returned from the Heavenly Bao continent for 15 years. Now he suddenly appeared and dared to challenge the number 1 inner court disciple. Kong Peng's sharp eyes immediately locked on Yi Xing. He stared at Yi Xing for a while and said, "Hey, nobody dares to challenge me, Kong Peng. Boy, you're a new disciple, right? Do you know the rules?" The number 1 inner court disciple had great benefits. Everyone wanted this position. However, no one dared to challenge the number 1 inner court disciple just because they wanted it. Otherwise, hundreds of thousands of inner court disciples would challenge Kong Peng. Kong Peng would be exhausted to death. In order to prevent the top-ranked disciples from encountering too many unnecessary challenges, the Dark Star Divine Palace set up a rule and gave the challenged disciples the right to teach the challenging disciples a serious lesson without harming their lives. With this rule, disciples who were not powerful would not dare to challenge others casually. Otherwise, they would be beaten so badly that they would not be able to get out of bed for half a month. Yi Xing was a nobody. Kong Peng did not know that there was an inner court disciple like him. He guessed that he must be a new disciple who did not know the rules. Most of the inner court disciples thought so too. Someone shouted, "Hey, nobody dares to challenge Senior Kong Peng. Isn't he courting death? Senior Kong Peng, teach him a serious lesson so that he will remember." Yi Xing met Kong Peng's sharp eyes and smiled casually. "Can't a nobody challenge you? Besides, I'm a nobody now. However, if I defeat you, I'll be famous." Whoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, a sharp aura exploded from Yi Xing's body. His energy shot up to the sky and the wind and clouds receded. Yi Xing's aura was comparable to that of a quasi-god. It was surging to the extreme. Kong Peng was shocked. His aura could not be compared to Yi Xing, an 8-star king. Whoosh! A beam of starlight shot up to the sky. Kong Peng used his astral aspect. It was an extreme wind element astral aspect. Yi Xing used his astral aspect at the same time. It was the Saint-grade vermilion bird aspect. Its power was even stronger and suppressed Kong Peng. Kong Peng was even more shocked. His aura and astral aspect were suppressed by Yi Xing. This was out of his expectations. However, Kong Peng snorted and a pair of low-grade divine weapon gloves appeared in his hands. The Kong family was a 5-star family on the Dark Star continent. The old ancestor of the family was a true god expert and an inner court elder of the Dark Star Divine Palace. Kong Peng's status in the Kong family was not low. He was also the number 1 inner court disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace. The Kong family rewarded him with a low-grade divine weapon, which was the gloves. "You don't have a divine weapon, right?" Kong Peng snorted in his heart. His figure flashed and turned into afterimages as he charged toward Yi Xing. Chapter 892. Yi Xing raised his hand, and the middle-grade divine weapon, Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow, appeared in his hand. Using the Azure Flame Void Annihilation Arrow art, Yi Xing swung the bow, creating a pale white shadow of a flaming bow, filled with violent power. Boom! Kong Peng's phantom was useless in front of Yi Xing. The flaming bow accurately hit Kong Peng's real body, blocking his attack. Yi Xing was as immovable as a mountain, not moving at all. On the other hand, Kong Peng was shocked as if he had suffered a heavy blow. His body shot backward, landing on the ground and retreating continuously. In the blink of an eye, he had retreated to the edge of the stage, almost being blasted off the stage by Yi Xing. The exchange between the two seemed to take a long time, but it actually happened in an instant. As the number 1 inner disciple, Kong Peng's strength couldn't be said to be weak. If a quasi-god didn't appear, no one would be his match. Even a 9-star king of the same realm would find it difficult to take a single blow from him. However, Yi Xing's strength was far beyond a 9-star king's, even if he didn't use the Black Hole astrology or Sagittarius constellation. Kong Peng naturally wasn't his match. This result was not only beyond Kong Peng's expectations, but also the inner disciples. Although Yi Xing's cultivation was only at the 8th level of the Astral Sea realm, his strength was heaven-defying. What shocked Kong Peng even more was the Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow in Yi Xing's hand. He said in a shocked voice, "Mid-grade divine weapon?" His only sense of superiority was the divine weapon in his hand, which was extremely rare among inner disciples. He didn't expect that Yi Xing's divine weapon was also a level higher than his. The divine weapon in his hand was actually a mid-grade divine weapon. Whether it was aura, astrology, divine weapon or strength, Kong Peng was completely suppressed by Yi Xing. Only his cultivation was higher than Yi Xing's by 1 level. However, he couldn't do anything else other than having a higher cultivation by 1 level. This made him seem even more cowardly. Kong Peng's fighting spirit immediately plummeted. In front of Yi Xing he was only left with an inferiority complex. "Remember, I am Yi Xing, titled Arrow Emperor." Yi Xing shouted loudly. His figure was like a ray of light as he instantly appeared in front of Kong Peng. He swept the azure sandalwood divine bow horizontally, and another flaming bow shadow shot out. The speed of the flaming bow was too fast, exceeding the limits of a king's reaction. Kong Peng couldn't dodge at all and could only raise his palm to block. Bang! The flaming bow struck Kong Peng's palms, and with a loud bang, Kong Peng spat out a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying off the stage. Yi Xing won easily. The inner disciples looked at each other in shock. They had expected this battle to end very quickly, and one side would win easily. However, they had thought that Kong Peng would win easily, but in the end it was Yi Xing who won easily. An 8-star king, an unknown new disciple, had actually defeated Kong Peng and become the #1 inner disciple. This result was very difficult for the inner disciples to accept. Some of them had cultivated for more than 100 years, while others had cultivated for hundreds of years. Many of them had stopped at the 9th level of the Star Sea realm, but they couldn't compare to a new disciple who had entered the sect for 15 years and was only an 8-star king. However, regardless of whether they felt good or not, Kong Peng had been defeated. Even Kong Peng wasn't a match for Yi Xing, so they naturally weren't a match for him. Yi Xing was originally a nobody, but now, everyone knew his name and remembered his title of Arrow Emperor. Of course, many disciples who cultivated the Tao of archery didn't like the title of Arrow Emperor. Immediately, a disciple who cultivated the Tao of archery started to make things difficult for Yi Xing. "How dare you give yourself the title of Arrow Emperor? You really have guts. Do you think that you are invincible among the kings of archery and that no one is a match for you?" The title of Arrow Emperor was given by Wei Qingxian, and Yi Xing liked it very much. Now that Wei Qingxian wasn't by his side, Yi Xing missed her very much. Since it was given by Wei Qingxian, Yi Xing would naturally maintain the title given by Yi Xing. Yi Xing's eyes were like lightning as he looked at that inner disciple and said coldly, "I am the Arrow Emperor. If you don't like it, come and fight me." That disciple's neck shrank. He was in the top 50 of the inner disciple rankings and was far from the top 10. How would he dare to fight with the #1 inner disciple, Yi Xing? Yi Xing's gaze swept across all the inner disciples. "I am the Arrow Emperor. If anyone doesn't like it, you can come and fight me." When they met Yi Xing's gaze, all the inner disciples lowered their heads. Kong Peng was already strong enough, and no one in the inner disciples could match him. As an archery martial artist, Yi Xing had defeated Kong Peng with just a wave of his bow. Everyone could see that Yi Xing's strength was far superior to Kong Peng's. Who would dare to fight with Yi Xing? "Little king, what big words." A cold shout came from afar. The voice was filled with disdain and resentment, and there was also a terrifying aura. Whoosh! As soon as the voice finished speaking, a beam of light streaked across the sky and stopped in the air, revealing a young figure. This person was walking on air and could fly in the air above the inner disciples. He was a quasi-god. All the disciples looked at the young man in the air. Many of them cupped their fists and bowed. "Greetings, senior brother Xueying." Kong Peng was the same. He had a respectful expression when facing this senior brother Xueying. Xueying was a first nirvana quasi-god and a core disciple. His status was much higher than that of the inner disciples. Yi Xing looked at Xueying with a calm expression. "Senior brother, my title is the Arrow Emperor. I don't think I'll get in your way, right?" Xueying stared at Yi Xing, his eyes filled with killing intent. "Your bullshit title has nothing to do with this god. However, you killed my younger brother Xuezi. This god has to settle the score with you." Xuezi. This was a name that had been buried in the depths of Yi Xing's memory. If no one mentioned it, Yi Xing would not even think about it. In the Heavenly Bao continent, Xuezi had chased after Yi Xing but was killed by Yi Xing. Only Huyan Long had seen this with her eye technique. Later, Yi Xing had killed Huyan Long with a void-piercing arrow. However, Huyan Long had told the other disciples that Yi Xing had killed Xuezi. It seemed like one of the disciples had told the Xue family about this. Yi Xing would never admit that Huyan Long, who had seen him kill Xuezi, was dead. He said, "Senior brother Xueying, you're mistaken. When did I kill Xuezi?" Xueying's eyes were fierce. Huyan Long saw it with her own eyes. "Although Huyan Long is dead, she is my younger brother's fiancée. She would never lie about the cause of my brother's death. Yi Xing, you killed a fellow disciple in the Heavenly Bao continent. This is a capital offense. Today, this god will take your life as an offering to my younger brother's soul in heaven." Xueying killed without hesitation. He activated his Saint-Tier demonic wind star form and took out a low-grade divine weapon. Heavenly Wind Demonic Sword Art. Shuang formed a sword art with his hands. The low-grade divine weapon shone brightly and shot out a terrifying demonic sword light. It fell from the sky and slashed at Yi Xing outside the challenge stage. The inner disciples were shocked. They did not expect Shuang to kill someone in the Dark Star God Palace. They retreated in all directions. However, they remembered that Shuang was avenging his younger brother. Many disciples could understand Shui Ying's emotions. However, Yi Xing, who had just won the first place, was in trouble. In the eyes of the inner disciples, once a quasi-god was angry, Yi Xing would definitely die. Chapter 893. To think that Shuang would actually try to kill him in front of so many people. This action was beyond Yi Xing's expectations. However, if Shuang really killed Yi Xing, although it was against the rules of the palace, killing a fellow disciple in public would have a huge impact and he would not be able to avoid punishment. However, as a core disciple, Shui Ying's status was much higher than that of an inner disciple, and he was eager to avenge his brother. If he was willing, he would probably be pardoned from the death penalty and would only suffer some punishment. Because of this, Shui Ying dared to kill him in front of so many people. If he captured Yi Xing and let the disciplinary hall sentence Yi Xing would insist that he did not kill Shui Zi. In the Heavenly Bao continent, he had broken the restrictions of the Heavenly Bao Hall and allowed the Dark Star Temple to obtain a large number of God-tier treasures. He had made a great contribution. If there was no conclusive evidence and only some rumors, there would be no way to convict him. However, if Yi Xing died, there would be no way to prove whether he had killed Shui Zi. There was no proof. Of course, Shuang wanted to kill Yi Xing on the spot. The baleful wind star form made the baleful sword light as fast as lightning. It only took an instant for it to appear and fall. No one believed that Yi Xing would be able to dodge this attack, and no one believed that he would be able to block it. However, Yi Xing's speed was not something that an ordinary quasi-god could compare to. When Shuang took out the divine sword, Yi Xing immediately attached arrow will to his body. The azure cloud wings appeared on his back, and he instantly traveled through the void. Whoosh! The baleful sword light slashed at the challenge platform. Yi Xing's figure instantly appeared 100 miles away, standing in the void. Yi Xing traveled through the void so quickly that the inner disciples did not notice that Yi Xing had left the challenge platform in the blink of an eye. However, as a quasi-god, Shuang was extremely sensitive to the fluctuations of the void. He clearly knew that Yi Xing had dodged the sword. One breath later, Yi Xing was already several hundred li away from Shuang, standing at the same height. In the inner sanctum of the Dark Star Divine Palace, the Forbidden Flight Array could restrict martial artists below the quasi-god realm from flying more than 30 meters above the ground. However, it could not restrict Yi Xing. Although he was an 8-star king, his mastery of 3 great Daos of heaven and earth had reached the minor completion realm. His mastery of arrow intent was at the peak of the space-binding realm. The aura he exuded was even stronger than that of an average quasi-god. Moreover, the azure cloud wings were already a divine artifact and a divine-grade flying treasure. It had the ability to shatter the restrictions of the void. Even though Yi Xing was only an 8-star king, he could still fly 30 meters above the ground. Shui Ying's pupils shrank. He attributed Yi Xing's speed and Yi Xing's ability to fly 30 meters above the ground to the flying artifact behind him. The value of a divine artifact was comparable to a mid-grade divine artifact. It was an extremely precious treasure to a quasi-god. Shuang wanted nothing but Yi Xing did. This caused Shui Ying's killing intent to soar. If he killed Yi Xing and obtained Yi Xing's belongings, it was not impossible. As long as the disciplinary hall did not require him to hand over Yi Xing's belongings, they would naturally belong to him. Die! Shuang roared. With a single step he covered several hundred li. His low-grade divine sword carried a terrifying sword baleful astral light as it shot forward. Almost in the blink of an eye, Yi Xing was once again faced with a fatal attack. It was only when Shui Ying charged at Yi Xing again that the inner disciples realized that Yi Xing had dodged the attack. Their faces were filled with shock. Yi Xing did not dodge Shui Ying's attack. He had already drawn the azure sandalwood divine bow and condensed a pale white flame arrow. The moment the sword baleful astral light shot out, Yi Xing released the bowstring and the flame arrow shot out. Boom! The flame arrow collided with the sword baleful astral light, releasing a heaven-shaking explosion. A terrifying destructive ripple spread out from the point of explosion in all directions like a ball. The shockwaves from the clash of quasi-gods were simply too great. The formations of the Dark Star Sacred Hall immediately reacted and activated on their own, suppressing the destructive shockwaves. Otherwise, the shockwaves alone would have been enough to shatter the earth and topple the mountains. With a loud explosion, the sword Baleful Astral Light was destroyed layer by layer. The flame arrow pierced through the sword Baleful Astral Light and continued to shoot toward Xueying. The inner disciples couldn't help but rub their eyes. In this exchange, Yixing was actually the stronger one? Xueying hurriedly recalled his divine sword. After the flame arrow pierced through the sword Baleful Astral Light, its strength was greatly weakened and Xueying blocked it with his sword. Even so, the terrifying strength still forced Xueying back 100 meters. Xueying was flabbergasted. He had never imagined that Yixing's archery would be so powerful that it was even a level higher than his. It was on par with an attack from a quasi-god of Nirvana, who, just as Xueying was panicking, an invisible strength suddenly descended and locked onto Xueying. The void around him instantly froze. The blue sandalwood divine bow condensed a pale white flame arrow once more. It locked onto Yixing and a powerful spatial binding force enveloped Xueying. Whoosh! The flame arrow instantly left the bow and shot out, piercing through the void. Xueying erupted his strength to the limit and barely managed to break free from the spatial binding force. He didn't have time to dodge, so he could only use the Big Dipper Fiend sword art to resist. Bang! The sword Baleful Astral Light was instantly scattered and the flame arrow pierced through Xueying's left arm. Xueying immediately screamed out in pain and was sent flying back several thousand meters. In the blink of an eye, the left arm that was struck by the flame arrow was completely pulverized. Even the flesh and blood couldn't be stopped. It wasn't until a breath of time later that the terrifying strength dissipated and Xueying's left arm regrew. But his vitality had been consumed by 20 to 30%. This left Xueying panic-stricken. Whoosh! Xueying followed the strength of this arrow and quickly fled. He didn't dare to stay. With Yixing's archery skills, several arrows would be enough to take his life. Yixing didn't chase after him. Xueying wanted to kill him because he wanted to take revenge for his little brother. If Yixing killed Xueying, it would at most be considered revenge. He wouldn't be able to escape the death penalty, so he could only teach Xueying a lesson. Otherwise, the arrow just now wouldn't have hit his arm, but his head or body. That arrow would have consumed all of his life force and he would have died in a single shot. The inner court disciples all looked at Yixing dumbfounded. Yixing had actually defeated Xueying and forced Xueying to flee. In the Dark Star Divine Palace, an inner court disciple defeating a core disciple hadn't happened for a full 600 years. After a brief moment of shock, the inner court disciples began to discuss. An inner court disciple defeating a core disciple. Since Xue Baotong from 600 years ago, this hasn't happened again. I really didn't expect Yixing to have such heaven-defying strength. He's only an 8-star king, but not even a 1 Nirvana quasi-god is his match. 600 years ago, Xue Baotong was able to defeat a 1 Nirvana quasi-god and was already at the peak of the 9th level of the Astral Sea realm. Yixing is only an 8-star king, so he's even more heaven-defying. An 8-star king defeating a 1 Nirvana quasi-god hasn't happened for tens of thousands of years. 10,000 years ago, when the Divine Emperor was still an inner court disciple, an 8-star king defeated a 1 Nirvana quasi-god. Chapter 894. The battle between Yixing and Xueying had caused such a huge commotion that even the array formations of the Dark Star Divine Palace were triggered, so it naturally attracted the attention of the upper echelons. The main peak of the Dark Star Divine Palace was more than 10,000 feet tall, and its peak pierced through the clouds like a paradise. At the top of the main peak was a magnificent palace that was both the main hall of the Dark Star Divine Palace and the Imperial Palace of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. In a room behind the main hall, the Dark Star Emperor, True God Dark Arrow, sat with a book in his hand. He withdrew his gaze from the inner sect of the Dark Star Divine Palace. Next to True God Dark Arrow was a middle-aged eunuch. He had a respectful expression, but his eyes were fierce. He was clearly an expert. True God Dark Arrow was tall and straight. Even sitting, he was still as imposing as a mountain. He put down the book in his hand and said, "Gao Man, bring that disciple called Yixing here." "Yes, Divine Emperor." Gao Man bowed and disappeared from the room like the wind. True God Dark Arrow's gaze fell on the book in front of him. There were 5 ancient words on the cover of the book. Astral Shift. True God Dark Arrow raised his hand and rubbed his head, sighing. The art of yin and yang, reversing the universe, shifting the stars, changing the heavens, is truly mysterious. It's a pity that this emperor can obtain such a wondrous art, but this emperor can't find the person with the supreme astral form. Sigh. Dark Star Divine Palace, Inner Sect. A group of deacons from the Hall of Penal Laws arrived above the Inner Sect. The deacons of the Hall of Penal Laws were all quasi-gods, and the leader was a quasi-god of 4 Nirvana. The quasi-gods all gave off monstrous auras. The quasi-god 4 Nirvana locked his gaze on Yixing and roared, "Let's go!" Inner Sect disciple Yixing has disrespected the rules of the palace and injured core disciple Xueying. The Hall Master of Penal Laws has ordered us to capture Yixing. Yixing, surrender. Yixing frowned slightly. He knew that if he killed Xueying, there would definitely be no way out. He didn't expect that just injuring Xueying would alert the punishment hall. Senior brother Xueying was clearly the one who wanted to kill senior brother Yixing, and senior brother Yixing was forced to fight back. Why did the Hall of Beheadings arrest senior brother Yixing instead? Immediately, the inner disciples began to discuss among themselves. In the beginning they were hostile towards Yixing, a nameless junior who challenged Kong Peng. Even though Yixing defeated Kong Peng, most of the inner disciples refused to accept him. However, when Yixing defeated the core disciple Xueying, the inner disciples' attitude changed. An inner disciple defeating a core disciple was a great honor, and the inner disciples were proud of it. Of course they would stand on Yixing's side. When the quasi-god 4 Nirvana saw that Yixing wasn't moving, he barked, "Yixing, why aren't you surrendering? Do you want us to make a move?" Yixing knew that since he refused a toast, he would have to drink a forfeit. In any case, he hadn't done anything wrong and had performed meritorious deeds for the Dark Star Temple. The punishment hall upheld the rules of the Dark Star Temple and wouldn't allow anyone to distort the truth, so it didn't matter if he went to the punishment hall. Yixing said, "I'll go with you." Whoosh. At this moment, an invisible ripple spread out, causing everyone's hearts to tremble as they felt a terrifying pressure. The quasi-gods in charge of the punishment hall all fell from the sky and landed on the ground, leaving only Yixing standing in the air. Besides Yixing, there was also a middle-aged man with a pale face and no beard. He was none other than Gao Man, the eunuch who served the Dark Star Emperor. In front of the Dark Star Emperor, Gao Man's head was lowered and his expression respectful, but at this moment he was puffing out his chest and looking down on everyone. The quasi-gods of the punishment hall and the countless inner sect disciples were all ignored by Gao Man. His gaze was fixed on Yixing alone. By the Divine Emperor's decree, I summon Yixing for an audience. Without waiting for Yixing's reply or consent, Gao Man waved his hand. Yixing felt the world turn upside down as he and Gao Man vanished from the sky. The quasi-gods in charge of the punishment hall and the inner sect disciples stared at the empty sky, dumbfounded. On the Dark Star continent, there was only one Divine Emperor, and that was the Hall Master of the Dark Star Temple and the Emperor of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. His title was True God Dark Arrow. This Hall Master God Emperor was a legendary figure in the Dark Star Temple. He was a peerless genius who had broken countless records in the Dark Star Temple. His strength far surpassed that of the previous Divine Emperors. Under his leadership, the Dark Star Divine Kingdom, which had been the weakest of the 3 Divine Kingdoms in the Flowing Light world, had become the #1 faction. 10,000 years ago, when he was still a disciple of the Dark Star Temple, he had blossomed with incomparably resplendent light, sweeping through his peers and undergoing 9 nirvanas. 9,000 years ago, he ascended to the position of True God and took over the position of Hall Master and Divine Emperor. Even for True God experts, he was a rare figure in the Dark Star Temple. If they were not summoned, they could not meet him. For martial artists below the True God level, the Dark Star Emperor was a legend. Inner sect disciples had little hope of meeting a True God expert, let alone the Dark Star Emperor. Seeing that Yixing had been summoned by the Dark Star Emperor, they were naturally dumbfounded. When the void around Yixing returned to normal, he was already at the peak of the main peak of the Dark Star Temple. In front of him was an immortal palace surrounded by white clouds. It was boundless and ethereal like a fairyland. "Let's go!" Tai Lan and Gao Man shouted softly and took the lead to enter the palace. Yixing followed closely, but his mind was racing. Why did the Dark Star Temple Master want to meet him? After thinking about it, it should have nothing to do with the Supreme Star form. Others could not detect the Supreme Star form. Even Reincarnation Sovereign could only see that Yixing had the saint-level Vermilion Bird Star form and did not see the Sagittarius constellation or the Black Hole Star form. The Dark Star Emperor was only a true god and naturally could not see it. Moreover, Yixing and the Dark Star Emperor had never met before, and the latter had never seen it before. Although I defeated Xueying and attracted the attention of a true god expert, the Dark Star Emperor is not an ordinary true god. It is unlikely that he would summon me because of this. There should be other reasons that attracted his attention. After thinking about it, it should be related to the heavenly Bao continent. Luo Tiangong was also an expert at the limit of a true god. The treasures he left behind should not be limited to those in the heavenly Bao palace. As for me, I am related to the real treasures that Luo Tiangong left behind. Yi Xing thought quickly. In the blink of an eye, thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind, and he could only think of one possibility. After entering the immortal palace, Yi Xing's vision suddenly widened. He could not see the end of the palace in front of him, left and right. It was a vast expanse of whiteness. However, in front of him, left and right, there were 9 huge pillars that pierced the sky. This immortal palace was the same as the Starry Palace. It was a spatial treasure. There was another world in the palace, and it was not as big as it looked from the outside. At the end of the 2 rows of pillars, there was a table and chair that shone with golden light. It was suspended in the clouds above. A tall man sat on the golden chair, exuding endless power. This person must be the Dark Star Emperor. As expected, Gao Man entered the immortal palace and bowed to the tall man sitting on the golden chair. Reporting to the Emperor God, Yi Xing is here. Chapter 895. Yi Xing stepped forward and cupped his fists in a disciple's salute. Disciple Yi Xing greets the palace master and the divine emperor. The Dark Star Emperor had 2 identities. One was the palace master of the Dark Star Divine Palace, and the other was the divine emperor of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. In front of a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace, he was naturally the palace master. The disciple was addressed as the palace master and the divine emperor. He only needed to salute as a disciple. If he had finished his apprenticeship, he would need to salute as a subject. The Dark Star Emperor's eyes were like lightning. His gaze fell on Yi Xing as if he had seen through Yi Xing. After looking for a while, the Dark Star Emperor nodded slightly. Not bad, not bad. The Dark Star Divine Palace hasn't had a genius disciple like you for a long time. You may rise. Yi Xing straightened his body. He was neither servile nor overbearing. If he had not seen the reincarnation sovereign, he would definitely be excited when he saw the Dark Star Emperor. However, Yi Xing had seen the martial Dao Supremes before. Although he did not see the other party's face clearly, he did meet him face to face and even spoke to him. Naturally, the excitement he felt towards the Dark Star Emperor decreased. It was like an ordinary person suddenly meeting a rank 1 high official. Naturally, he would be excited. If he met the Emperor first and then met a rank 1 high official, his excitement would naturally decrease. The Dark Star Emperor continued to size up Yi Xing. You broke the seal left by the heavenly Bao True God in the heavenly Bao Palace. The essence blood of the archery True God also flows in your body. It should have been left by the heavenly Bao True God. It seems that you have obtained the inheritance of the heavenly Bao Divine Palace and cultivated in seclusion for 15 years in order to achieve such achievements. Yi Xing nodded. The palace master and the divine emperor are wise. I have indeed obtained the recognition of the heavenly Bao True God. However, I have not obtained all the inheritance of the heavenly Bao True God. I have to wait until I become a 9-star king and enter the heavenly Bao continent to obtain it. The Dark Star Emperor's expression was normal, but his tone was doubtful. If that's the case, why did you return to the Dark Star Divine Palace now? Wouldn't it be more convenient to cultivate to the level of a 9-star king and obtain all of True God Tiangong's inheritance? Yi Xing said, Disciple knows that the Dark Star Divine Palace has the Star Origin Pagoda, which can increase the cultivation speed of kings. Disciple will return to the Dark Star Divine Palace and become the number 1 inner disciple, which will greatly shorten the time needed to break through to the 9-star king realm. The Dark Star Emperor nodded his head slightly, agreeing with Yi Xing's reasoning. Yi Xing, as a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace, the Dark Star Divine Palace has brought you from a mid-tier continent to the Dark Star mainland, accepted you as a disciple, and nurtured you with great effort. Whatever you have gained in the heavenly Bao continent is naturally your own luck. However, you cannot forget about the Dark Star Divine Palace behind you. Previously, when you unlocked the heavenly Bao Palace's seal, you handed over 50% of your gains to the Dark Star Divine Palace. That was a good job, and the Dark Star Divine Palace's nurturing of you was not in vain. Yi Xing understood the meaning behind the Dark Star Emperor's words. He nodded his head and said, Disciple will remember the kindness of the Dark Star Divine Palace. The next time I enter the heavenly Bao continent, I will still hand over 50% of all the inheritances of the heavenly Bao True God to the Dark Star Divine Palace as a thank you for nurturing me. The Dark Star Emperor smiled slightly. Do you know that the heavenly Bao True God had entered the Star Secret Realm and obtained a great opportunity? Yi Xing nodded his head in agreement. The Dark Star Emperor continued, the Star Secret Realm was left behind by the Supreme Being. All the items obtained from the Star Secret Realm are of great use to the Dark Star Divine Palace. If you obtain any treasures or inheritances related to the Star Secret Realm in the Heavenly Bao Continent, you are not allowed to hide them. Do you understand? Yi Xing said, disciple understands. The Dark Star Emperor waved his hand. You may leave. Gao Man, send him back. Yes, Emperor God. Disciple will take his leave. After the two of them finished speaking, Gao Man brought Yi Xing and walked out of the palace. The Dark Star Emperor flicked his finger and a dark shadow flew out. It was like a meteor piercing through the sky. It was unimaginably fast. In an instant, it entered Yi Xing's body from behind. Yi Xing did not notice it at all. When they were outside the palace, Gao Man used the void shift technique again. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xing was sent to the inner sanctum area. On the main peak of the Dark Star in the Immortal Palace, the Dark Star Emperor revealed a smile at the corner of his mouth. He had hidden a part of his will of soul in Yi Xing's body. He could sense every move of Yi Xing clearly. When the Dark Star Emperor was young, he had also entered the Heavenly Bao Continent. Other than a divine weapon, he had gained nothing. However, a disciple from a mid-level continent had actually obtained the inheritance of Luo Tiangong. This really puzzled the Dark Star Emperor. He had hidden a part of his will of soul in Yi Xing's body so that he could sense every move of Yi Xing at any time. When Yi Xing entered the Heavenly Bao Continent again in the future, he could use his will of soul to sense everything that Yi Xing had experienced in the Heavenly Bao Continent. After returning to the inner sanctum, Yi Xing went straight to the Star Origin Tower. Yi Xing did not lack divine weapons or divine weapons. The only thing he needed was the effect of the Star Origin Tower to speed up his cultivation. Now that he was the first in the inner sanctum, of course he had to make good use of the benefits of being the first in the inner sanctum. He entered the third level of the Star Origin Tower to cultivate and increase his cultivation speed by 3 times. In the Dark Star Godly Palace, other than the outer sanctum and inner sanctum area, there was also the core area, the central area and other places. It covered a vast area of more than 10,000 miles. The core area was where the inner sanctum elders and core disciples resided. Every inner sanctum elder had their own mountain, and the area of several hundred miles was their private territory. True Flame Peak was the mountain of the inner sanctum elder Shuinan. He had dozens of quasi-god disciples under him. The Shui family martial artists who entered the Dark Star Godly Palace enjoyed the benefits of being in a favorable position. As long as they became quasi-gods, they would all become Shuinan's disciples. Shuinan had lived for more than 10,000 years, and his mentality was old. He did not care much about Shui Zi's death in the Heavenly Bao Continent. However, the quasi-god disciples of the Shui family were still young, and they were very angry. Currently there were 3 quasi-god disciples in the Dark Star Godly Palace: Xueli, Shui Baotong and Xueying. Among them Xueli was the oldest. He was already over 900 years old and was a 4th Nirvana quasi-god. Shui Baotong was over 600 years old and was a 5th Nirvana quasi-god. Xueying was over 100 years old and was a 1st Nirvana quasi-god. On the day that Yi Xing challenged Kong Peng, only Xueying was in the Dark Star Godly Palace. Now Xueli and Shui Baotong had received Shui Ying's message and returned to the Dark Star Godly Palace. Shui Zi was Shui Ying's younger brother, and Xueying was only 100 years old. He was very young and could be said to be hot-blooded. Xueying was most concerned about Shui Zi's death. Shui Ying's killing intent towards Yi Xing was very strong. Huyan Long would not fabricate the cause of my brother's death. It must be Yi Xing who killed my brother. Furthermore, Huyan Long was killed by an arrow that suddenly appeared in the Heavenly Bao Continent. It must be Yi Xing who killed him to silence him. Senior brothers, we cannot let this matter rest. Xueli was more than 900 years old, and his mentality was the most balanced of the 3. He did not care much about Shui Zi's death. However, because of Xueying he was implicated. Xueli said, if it was just an ordinary disciple we could use some tricks to kill him. However, Yi Xing was summoned by the palace master Shenhuang. This is not ordinary. Besides the true god elders, how many people in the Dark Star Godly Palace have the fortune to meet the palace master Shenhuang? In my opinion, it's best not to offend the palace master Shenhuang. Chapter 896. The Palace Master Divine Emperor was a legend in the Dark Star Divine Palace. Yi Xing had been summoned by the Palace Master Divine Emperor. Shui Baotong was a genius among the quasi-god disciples, so he did not dare to go against the will of the Palace Master Divine Emperor. However, seeing how unwilling Shui was, Shui Baotong knew that if Yi Xing did not die, Shuang would not be relieved. As members of the same clan and disciples under Shui Nan, there was still some affection between them. Moreover, Yi Xing had killed a Shui family disciple, which made Shui Baotong unhappy. Shui Baotong thought for a moment and said, Yi Xing has been summoned by the Divine Emperor. It is impossible to kill him in the Dark Star Divine Palace. However, if he leaves the Dark Star Divine Palace, there is a chance that any martial artist will die outside. At that time, it is not impossible to kill him. Shui Ying's eyes lit up. That's right. If Yi Xing leaves the Dark Star Divine Palace, there will be a chance to kill him. At that time I will have to rely on you too. On the third floor of the Star Origin Pagoda, the rich star yuan qi was so condensed that it was visible to the naked eye. Inside, the star yuan qi would drill into one's body even if one did not use a cultivation technique. If one used a cultivation technique, the star yuan qi would be rapidly absorbed like a river. Yi Xing sat in the middle of the cultivation room, fully circulating the highest level of the mystic peak grade falling star art. His body was like a bottomless pit, crazily absorbing the star yuan qi around him. The rich star yuan qi gathered around Yi Xing, forming a vortex visible to the naked eye. Yi Xing's cultivation progressed by leaps and bounds. Time passed day after day. Soon a month had passed. Yi Xing did not receive any challenge and continued to cultivate on the third floor of the Star Origin Pagoda. He would not give up until he became a 9-star king. Even quasi-god Shuang had been defeated by Yi Xing. This news had spread throughout the inner sect. Other than the disciples who hadn't ventured out yet, all the disciples of the Dark Star Divine Palace, regardless of whether they were inner, outer, or core disciples, knew about the Arrow Emperor Yi Xing's sect. Even the high and mighty true god powerhouses had heard of Yi Xing. After all, other than defeating Shuang, Yi Xing had also received an audience with the Divine Emperor. There was no doubt that the Arrow Emperor Yi Xing was the most famous person in the Dark Star Divine Palace during this period of time. Everyone knew who he was. Yi Xing's strength was so strong that the inner disciples only had a deep respect for him. No one dared to challenge him. After all, no inner disciple believed that they had the strength of a quasi-god. Therefore, Yi Xing did not need to leave the Star Essence Tower at the beginning of each month. If no one challenged him, he would still be ranked first in the inner sect and could continue to cultivate on the third floor. Time passed quickly. Month after month, year after year, Yi Xing remained on the third floor of the Star Essence Tower, cultivating in seclusion. Yi Xing refined and absorbed a huge amount of star yuan qi, causing Yi Xing's cultivation base to continuously consolidate and improve. After more than 3 years of accumulation, Yi Xing's cultivation base finally reached the stage of breaking through the silkworm to become a butterfly, making a qualitative breakthrough. On this day, the star yuan qi in the entire Star Essence Tower went berserk. Even outside the Star Essence Tower, countless star yuan qi were attracted by an invisible force from all directions and gathered together. A huge star yuan qi vortex appeared in the sky above the Star Essence Tower, hanging upside down like a funnel. An endless stream of star yuan qi poured into the third floor of the Star Essence Tower. The cultivation room on the third floor was already filled with astral yuan qi. Yi Xing was at the center of the astral yuan qi. Not only his meridians but even the billions of pores on his body were madly absorbing the astral yuan qi, breaking through to the 9th level of the astral sea realm. The whole process lasted for an hour. The star yuan qi vortex in the sky had thinned out and finally dissipated. However, a terrifying aura was emitted from the third floor of the Star Essence Tower. In the cultivation room on the third floor, Yi Xing stood up. His cultivation base had already broken through to the 9th level of the astral sea realm, becoming a 9-star king. In the starry crescent land, he was an existence worthy of being called an emperor. Yi Xing's astral wind had another qualitative breakthrough. When he was a 7-star king, he had already cultivated the black level top grade falling star incantation to the limit. The strength of his astral wind was no weaker than that of a 9-star king. Now Yi Xing's astral wind continued to strengthen after 2 breakthroughs. Compared to a 9-star king's astral wind, the strength of his astral wind was 2 levels higher. It was almost comparable to that of a first nirvana quasi-god who had already undergone the nirvana tribulation. Yi Xing clenched his fist. He felt that every part of his body was filled with terrifying power. Every move of his was filled with a vast divine power that could move mountains and fill seas. After becoming a 9-star king, I can finally enter the heavenly Bao continent again and obtain all the inheritances of true God Tiangong. Furthermore, I can enter the star secret realm and search for the treasures left behind by the star sovereign. Yi Xing's mind spun. He was extremely happy. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. The Dark Star Emperor immediately sensed Yi Xing's breakthrough. Like Yi Xing, the Dark Star Emperor also revealed a look of joy. True God Tiangong was a legend in the flowing light world. He was the strongest among the true gods. Even the Star God Emperor was interested in all the inheritances left behind by True God Tiangong. Especially when True God Tiangong had obtained a great opportunity in the Star Secret Realm. When the Dark Star Emperor was a 9-star king, he had also entered the Star Secret Realm but did not obtain much. The Dark Star Emperor had always wanted to know what kind of great opportunity True God Tiangong had obtained in the Star Secret Realm. Now he finally had the hope of finding out. His soul would follow Yi Xing into the heavenly Bao continent. He would be able to sense everything that Yi Xing had experienced clearly. The Dark Star Emperor was like True God Tiangong in the past. He had stopped at the limit of a real god. He wanted to become a martial arts supremacy, but he did not even have a direction. He was anxious to know some secrets of the Star Secret Realm so that he could peek into the path of becoming a martial arts supremacy. After leaving the Star Origin Tower, Yi Xing met up with Feng Xiaoxiao and the other disciples from the Starry Crescent land. In the past 3 years, many outer disciples had broken through and become inner disciples. Feng Xiaoxiao had even become a 6-star king. According to Feng Xiaoxiao, Zhuo Fifan had even broken through to become a 6-star king. He had become the first disciple in this batch of disciples, other than Yi Xing, to become a high king. Feng Xiaoxiao and Zhuo Fifan were the most outstanding geniuses among Yi Xing's batch of disciples. However, under Yi Xing's brilliance, they seemed to be overshadowed. In the teleportation hall of the Dark Star Divine Palace, there was a level 7 teleportation formation here. Its powerful energy was enough to teleport one to any area in the Dark Star continent. However, the level 7 teleportation formation consumed a lot of energy. Unless it was an emergency, the Dark Star Divine Palace would not activate it. Yi Xing left the Dark Star Divine Palace through the level 6 teleportation formation and arrived at the city closest to the entrance of the heavenly Bao continent. Then, he continued to use the teleportation formation in the city to arrive at the entrance of the heavenly Bao continent. Chapter 898. The Dark Star Emperor took a step forward and disappeared from the main peak's immortal palace, traveling through the void at an extremely fast speed. There was a huge gap between a quasi-god and a true god. Even a 6th Nirvana quasi-god could only travel tens of thousands of miles by teleporting through the void. A true god could teleport up to 1 billion miles away. An ultimate true god like the Dark Star Emperor could teleport up to 1 billion miles away. In other words, as long as the Dark Star Emperor was willing, he could teleport to any place in the Dark Star continent other than the sealed space. Moreover, he could teleport to anywhere he wanted. As for the sealed space, it was not something that could be teleported to. It had nothing to do with distance such as the Star Secret Realm. Near the entrance of the Dark Star continent to the heavenly Bao continent, Shui Baotong, Xueli, and Xueying were shocked when Yi Xing said that the Emperor God was here. When they turned back to look, Yi Xing had used the black hole astrology and shrouded them in the world of darkness. Just as they were shocked, the sudden darkness shocked the 3 of them. They did not see that Yi Xing had used the astrology and thought that the Dark Star Emperor was really here. The sudden darkness was the Emperor God's doing. Therefore, when Yi Xing traveled through the world of darkness and went around them, the 3 of them did not react in time. In a breath's time, Yi Xing arrived near the entrance of the heavenly Bao continent. Usually, the void door to the heavenly Bao continent was hidden and could not be seen by martial artists. However, Yi Xing had the heavenly Bao order and could clearly sense the void door. He rushed into the void door directly. The black hole astrology in the sky disappeared immediately, and so did the world of darkness. While Xueli and Xueying were still in shock, Shui Baotong realized that Yi Xing had disappeared. Whoosh! A spatial vortex appeared and a terrifying pressure came out of it. In the blink of an eye, a person walked out of the spatial vortex. This person was tall, and he was dressed in a black brocade robe with 9 golden dragons embroidered on it. He wore a crown with 5 pearls on it. He was the divine emperor of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom, as well as the palace master of the Dark Star Divine Palace, True God Dark Arrow. As soon as the pressure came, Shui Baotong and the other two were pressed down to the ground from the sky. The terrifying pressure made it impossible for them to move. The Dark Star Emperor's divine eyes were like torches. Naturally, he could see the void gate that was hidden in the void. At this moment, his divine eyes were burning with rage. Yi Xing had the supreme astrology, but he had gone to the heavenly Bao continent through the void gate. He had left a wisp of soul will in Yi Xing's body, which was under his surveillance at all times. Yi Xing had escaped right under his nose. The Dark Star Emperor had asked Yi Xing to go to the heavenly Bao continent because he wanted to know what kind of opportunity true God Tiangong had obtained in the star's secret realm. His goal was to find a way to break through to the supreme level. However, he only needed to move Yi Xing's supreme astrology into his body. Then, it would be possible for him to become a supreme-level martial artist. If he had known that Yi Xing had the supreme astrology, he would not have asked Yi Xing to go to the heavenly Bao continent. Damn it. Damn it. So, this little guy has the supreme astrology. I have miscalculated. The Dark Star Emperor roared in his heart. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the hidden void gate. He slammed his palm down. Boom. The entire space collapsed. The void gate also shattered into nothingness. The terrifying power was transmitted through the space of the void gate and reached the distant heavenly Bao continent. The collapsed space was reformed under the rules of heaven and earth and returned to normal. However, the void gate that connected to the heavenly Bao continent had been destroyed and no longer appeared. The Dark Star Emperor retracted his palm and took a deep breath. After all, he was not an ordinary person. Even though he had lost his composure, it was only for a moment before he calmed down. The Dark Star Emperor thought to himself, although Yi Xing has entered the heavenly Bao continent and I can't do anything to him, he will return to the Dark Star Temple after obtaining the inheritance of true God Tiangong. Why should I be so agitated and destroy the passage that connects the Dark Star continent and the heavenly Bao continent? Without this void gate, Yi Xing would not be able to return to the Dark Star continent from the heavenly Bao continent. What should I do? The Dark Star Emperor blamed himself. It had been a long time since he had lost his composure. However, this was related to the supreme astrology and whether he could become a supreme martial artist. It was reasonable for the Dark Star Emperor to be agitated when he saw the opportunity slip through his fingers and reach a level that he could not control. Damn it. If I had known this would happen, I would have come here earlier. He would not have been able to escape from me. Damn it. The Dark Star Emperor regretted it very much. Then the Dark Star Emperor waved his hand and shattered the void gate. His figure disappeared and he left the Dark Star continent and headed to the starry sky where the heavenly Bao continent was. As for Shui Baotong and the other two, they were like 3 ants in the eyes of the Dark Star Emperor. From the beginning to the end, the Dark Star Emperor did not even look at them. It was only when the Dark Star Emperor left that Shui Baotong and the other two felt the invisible pressure disappear and their bodies regained their freedom. The 3 of them looked at each other and their faces were full of fear. The Dark Star Emperor shuttled through the void gate and teleported billions of miles in the blink of an eye. Soon he arrived in the vast starry sky. In front of him was a huge continent floating in the void gate. It was the heavenly Bao continent. Outside the heavenly Bao continent, there was a layer of translucent space barrier that enveloped the entire continent. It was a barrier that separated the continent from the starry sky. Only a true God powerhouse could forcefully pass through it and travel between the various starry sky continents and the extraterritorial starlands. However, the heavenly Bao continent was not an ordinary extraterritorial starland. True God Tiangong had set up a terrifying method here. The entire heavenly Bao continent was covered with a formation prohibition and it had its own set of rules. Even a true God powerhouse could not ignore this set of rules and forcefully enter the heavenly Bao continent. Unless one had absolute power and could destroy all the methods that true God Tiangong had left behind. Although Yi Xing would return to the Dark Star continent after receiving true God Tiangong's inheritance, there was a possibility that other accidents would happen and he would never return. The Dark Star Emperor had been searching for the supreme astrology for thousands of years. Now that he had finally found one, he would not allow any accidents to happen. Therefore, the Dark Star Emperor decided to forcefully destroy the formation prohibition that true God Tiangong had left behind and enter the heavenly Bao continent to control Yi Xing whoosh. A ray of starlight shot up into the sky. The Dark Star Emperor had used his astrology. It was a huge star that was emitting moonlight. On the star, there was a huge wolf shadow that was howling at the sky, emitting a fierce aura. Saint-level astrology, heavenly wolf astrology. There were 3 types of saint-level astrology. One was an attribute type such as the green dragon astrology, vermilion bird astrology, etc. One was a weapon type such as the heavenly sword astrology, heavenly blade astrology, etc. One was a fierce star type such as the heavenly wolf astrology, heavenly army destroyer astrology, etc. Chapter 899. When attribute astrology was combined with martial arts, it could greatly increase the power of martial arts. When weapon astrology was combined with weapons, it could greatly increase the power of martial arts. As for ominous star astrology, it could increase the power of both martial arts and attack. It was the most terrifying of all. Therefore, ominous stars were generally known as demon stars in troubled times. The appearance of one would be accompanied by a rain of blood. The Dark Star Emperor had experienced many bloody storms in his life. He wasn't a direct descendant of the Mo imperial clan, but a side branch. His status was inferior to that of the direct descendants. But among the direct descendants of the same generation, a peerless genius had appeared. His talent was monstrous, and he wasn't much inferior to the Dark Star Emperor. When the two of them were disciples of the Dark Star Emperor, they had progressed side by side, and their cultivations were equally matched. The Dark Star Emperor was only able to suppress his opponent in terms of battle prowess. At that time, the previous God Emperor had reached the end of his 30,000 years of life, and a new God Emperor had succeeded him. Although the Dark Star Emperor was able to suppress that direct descendant genius in terms of battle prowess, the majority of the true God powerhouses of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom supported that direct descendant genius as the next God Emperor. Although strength was respected in the world of martial arts, when two people's cultivation and strength weren't too different, their status would still have a great influence. This was especially true in a divine kingdom, where the importance of status was especially important. To that direct descendant genius, the existence of the Dark Star Emperor was always a threat. Therefore, he did everything he could to eliminate the Dark Star Emperor. The Dark Star Emperor's talent was monstrous, and he also had a group of supporters. Although they weren't as numerous as the direct descendant genius, they were all powerful people. With their protection and the Dark Star Emperor's strength, the Dark Star Emperor had managed to survive the schemes of that direct descendant genius time and time again. After the Dark Star Emperor underwent 9 nirvanas, the situation changed. His wings had fully grown, and he became the #1 expert of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. Even the older generation of true gods were no match for him. He had far surpassed that direct descendant genius. In the competition for the position of Godly Emperor Dark Star personally ended the life of that direct descendant genius, killed more than 10 true gods who were loyal to that direct descendant genius, and annihilated dozens of 4-star and 5-star clans. In that bloody storm, who knows how many martial artists lost their lives. The birth of an ominous star, a rain of blood and a foul wind, ominous. This was definitely not a lie. It wasn't until the Dark Star Divine Emperor ascended to the position of Divine Emperor and became the supreme ruler of the Dark Star continent that the internal strife was completely quelled. However, they continued to fight with the Radiance Divine Nation and the Star River Divine Nation. After thousands of years of fighting, the Dark Star Divine Nation, which was ranked last, became the strongest force in the flowing light world. At this point, the Dark Star Emperor's life finally calmed down. However, he had been secretly searching for martial artists who possessed the supreme celestial form in order to take the final step and become a supreme martial artist. Outside the Heavenly Bow continent, the Dark Star Emperor, who had used the Sirius celestial form, exuded an extremely terrifying aura. The surrounding void was distorted endlessly and the space collapsed. Destroy! God King Darkstar bellowed and struck out with his palm. The surging divine power turned into a giant hand that covered the sky. It was unknown how big it was, and it fiercely bombarded the space barrier outside the Heavenly Bow continent. Boom! A deafening sound rang out, and terrifying destructive ripples spread out, rushing thousands of miles away in the starry sky. The space barrier of the Heavenly Bow continent, even with the support of the formation set up by the Heavenly Bow True God, made cracking noises. In the blink of an eye, cracks appeared and continued to expand. The power of the Dark Star Emperor's palm was extremely terrifying and unstoppable. If it was not for the power of the formation set up by the Heavenly Bow True God, even the space barrier of the Heavenly Bow continent would not be able to stop him, let alone the space barrier of the Outer Star continent. Seeing that the space barrier of the Heavenly Bow continent was about to be destroyed by the Dark Star Emperor's palm, there was a sudden change in the sky above the Heavenly Bow continent. Whoosh! A terrifying aura appeared, and the space barrier emitted a dazzling light. A giant silver divine bow appeared, and there was a divine dragon roaring on the bow. The silver divine bow was pulled by an invisible force, and the bowstring was pulled, condensing into a giant arrow that was 100 miles long. Whoosh! The arrow left the bowstring in an instant, shooting through the void for 100,000 miles and hitting the giant hand. In an instant, the giant hand was torn into pieces. Silver Dragon Sky Shooting Bow. The Dark Star Emperor stared at the silver divine bow that was 100,000 miles away, and his gaze froze. Luo Tiangong, you're dead and I'm not alive. It's really shocking that I can't compete with you. If you were still alive, you'd be a strong opponent of mine. It's hard to say who's stronger and who's weaker. However, you've been dead for 20,000 years and you've only left behind some tricks. You want to stop me? You're delusional. As he spoke, the Dark Star Emperor raised his hand, and a green divine bow appeared in his hand. There seemed to be a wolf soul in the green divine bow, and it was howling toward the sky. I have a top-grade divine bow too. Let's see if your silver dragon sky shooting bow is stronger, or if my Sirius moon howling bow is better. Sky Screen God Archery Skill. The Dark Star Emperor shouted loudly, and the Sirius moon howling bow was pulled into a full moon. A black arrow condensed, and the void in front of him suddenly turned dark. The entire void seemed to be covered by a curtain. Whoosh! The black arrow shot out explosively towards the Heavenly Bow mainland. The silver dragon sky shooting bow above the Heavenly Bow continent sensed it, and shot an arrow at the same time. The two arrows were more than 100,000 miles apart, but in the blink of an eye, they collided together. Boom, 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 boom. There were continuous explosions, and the space barrier outside the Heavenly Bow continent was the first to collapse. Then, layers of formations were destroyed. The silver dragon sky shooting bow was only activated by the power of the formation, but the Skywolf howling moon bow was used by the Dark Star Godly Emperor. Of course, the arrow shot by the Dark Star Godly Emperor was much more powerful than the Skywolf howling moon bow. After breaking the enemy's arrow, it also broke through several layers of formations. A smile appeared on the Dark Star Emperor's face. Unless True God Tiangong was still alive, no formation set up by True God Tiangong would be able to stop him. Although the Heavenly Bow continent was vast, and there were many formations and restrictions, the Dark Star Emperor was able to break through all of them. As long as he broke through a passage in the Heavenly Bow continent, the formations and restrictions of the Heavenly Bow continent would be completely divided into two halves, and there would be an imbalance. At most, the Heavenly Bow continent will cease to exist in one day. That little guy won't be able to escape from my palm. The Dark Star Emperor's lips curled up slightly and he thought to himself. Yi Xing had just teleported to the Heavenly Bow continent when he felt the passage behind him collapse. Then, the Heavenly Bow order shone brightly, and it enveloped Yi Xing as he teleported through the void, and he appeared directly in the Heavenly Bow Palace. Whoosh! Ingui descended from the sky and landed in front of Yi Xing. He looked at Yi Xing excitedly. You've become a 9-star king? Chapter 902. Facing the Dark Star Emperor's arrogance, Godly Emperor Xing He and Godly Emperor Guang Guang could do nothing but feel indignant. The two of them looked at each other and prepared to leave. They did not want to stay here and watch the Dark Star Emperor suffer. Divine Emperor Dark Star suddenly stopped and said, "Wait a moment, you two." The Radiance Emperor was furious. He snorted coldly, "What? Do you want to keep us here?" The Dark Star Emperor retracted his disdainful expression and said seriously, "No, I'm asking for your help." The Dark Star Emperor would need close to a day's time to destroy the Heavenly Bow continent's formation by himself. Through the monitoring of his will of soul, he found out that Yi Xing would be heading to the Star Secret Realm in 6 hours' time. Obviously, this would cause the Dark Star Emperor to miss nothing. Since Yi Xing had entered the Star Mystery Realm, no one knew what would happen. The Dark Star Emperor naturally wanted to capture Yi Xing as soon as possible and control him. With his strength, even if he used all his trump cards, he would only be able to speed up the process by 2 to 4 hours. Therefore, he could only ask Godly Emperor Xinghe and Godly Emperor Guang for help. Seeing the change in the Dark Star Emperor's expression, the Godly Emperor Xinghe and the Godly Emperor Guang Guang were slightly surprised. They thought to themselves, what is the reason for the Dark Star Emperor to be so impatient to break the Heavenly Bow mainland's forbidden formation? Naturally, the two of them could not guess. However, they were happy with the Dark Star Emperor's request. Godly Emperor Light sneered, "Dark Star Emperor, you'll need our help someday, hee hee." The implication was clear. You want me to help you? Dream on. Godly Emperor Xinghe smiled coldly. His expression was similar to Godly Emperor Radiance's. How could the Dark Star Emperor not know what the two of them were thinking? Although he despised the two of them, he did indeed need their help to break through the Heavenly Bow Continent's restrictive spell and capture Yi Xing within 6 hours. Therefore, the Dark Star Emperor had no choice but to temporarily put down his pride. The Dark Star Emperor said, "I will give you a reward. If you help me break through the Heavenly Bow Continent's restrictions as quickly as possible, each of you will receive a high-grade divine artifact." For true gods, the treasures they usually used were high-grade divine grade. Top-grade divine grade treasures were treasures that could only be chanced upon and not sought. In the 3 temples they were the most important treasures. The superior divine treasure that the Dark Star Emperor had taken out was already the best treasure he could offer. As for the Temple Guardian treasure, he naturally couldn't give it to others. In the entire flowing light world there were at least several hundred true gods. However, there were less than several hundred high-grade divine-level treasures. At least 20 to 30% of the true gods did not have a high-grade divine-level treasure. From this, one could see how precious a high-grade divine-level treasure was. However, Godly Emperor Xinghe and Godly Emperor Radiance weren't ordinary true gods. They were the godly emperors of their respective countries. They even had low divine-grade treasures, so why would they care about a high divine-grade treasure? Godly Emperor Radiance sneered, "A high-grade divine-level treasure? Are you trying to send a beggar away? Dark Star Emperor, you can have fun here. Just pretend that we were never here." Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xinghe looked at each other and were about to leave. The Dark Star Emperor said, "Two each." Even some true gods didn't have a high-grade divine-level treasure. Although the Dark Star Emperor had more than one, it wouldn't be too many. 2 high-grade divine-level treasures per person, that would be 4. It was a huge price to pay. However, Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xinghe weren't tempted. With a wave of their hands, the space in front of them shattered and they were about to teleport. The Dark Star Emperor shouted, "5 each." The Dark Star Emperor only had slightly more than 10 high-grade divine-level treasures on him. Giving 5 to each of them meant giving away 10. Losing 90% of his treasures in an instant was akin to cutting his flesh and dripping blood. However, the Dark Star Emperor didn't even frown when he thought about capturing Yi Xing, obtaining the highest level of astrology, and having a chance to become a supreme. If he could become a supreme, what was a high-grade divine-level treasure? The space vortex disappeared, but Godly Emperor Xinghe and Godly Emperor Radiance didn't disappear with it. Instead, they stopped their teleportation. 5 high-grade divine-level treasures per person was enough to move them. Although high-grade divine-level treasures didn't have any substantial effect on the 2 godly emperors, they were still godly emperors of their respective countries and hall masters. They had many true god experts under them, and many of them didn't have any high-grade divine-level treasures. 5 high-grade divine-level treasures were enough to equip 5 true gods, raising their strength to another level. Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xinghe exchanged a glance, then turned to the Dark Star Emperor at the same time. "Give them the treasures first, then we'll act." The Dark Star Emperor waved his hand and 10 high-grade divine-level treasures flew towards the 2 godly emperors. There were divine weapons, medicinal pills, forbidden weapons, all kinds of treasures. Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xinghe acted at the same time, snatching the most valuable treasures. In the blink of an eye they each had 5 treasures. Godly Emperor Xinghe snorted. He was a bit slower than Godly Emperor Radiance, so the most valuable high-grade divine-level medicinal pills were snatched away by Godly Emperor Radiance. The Dark Star Emperor only cared about giving out 10 high-grade divine-level treasures. He didn't care how the 2 godly emperors divided the treasures. Seeing the 2 godly emperors take the treasures, he said, "Hurry up and act quickly. Don't take the rewards without doing anything. This emperor isn't that easy to fool. Go all out and break the formation as fast as you can." The higher the status of a cultivator, the more they cared about face. They would never break their promises. Godly Emperor Xinghe and Godly Emperor Radiance were godly emperors of their respective countries. They were even more particular. Since they had received their rewards, they naturally went all out. Godly Emperor Xinghe used the saint-level Azure Dragon celestial aspect. He took out a high-grade divine spear and performed the high-grade divine martial art, galaxy world-destroying spear technique. With a thrust of the spear, the space collapsed and the formation was broken. Godly Emperor Radiance used the saint-level Saint Light celestial aspect. He took out a high-grade divine sword and performed the high-grade divine martial art, Radiance Divine Sword Technique. The sword energy was like a ray of light. Wherever it passed, the space was cut into two. Its breaking effect was even better than Godly Emperor Xinghe's. With the three Godly Emperors working together, the effect of breaking the formation was not as simple as 1 + 1 + 1. It was multiplied several times. In less than 6 hours, it was enough to destroy the entire Heavenly Bao Continent's formation. If the three of them went berserk, the time would be shortened by a lot. Godly Emperor Xinghe and Godly Emperor Radiance maintained their full strength. They didn't slack off, but they didn't go berserk either. On the other hand, the Dark Star Emperor was as fast as he could. He kept burning his divine energy and his strength was beyond his usual. In just about 3 hours, 70 to 80% of the Heavenly Bao Continent's formation had been broken. The rest would be destroyed in another hour. The Dark Star Emperor was overjoyed. If Yi Xing left the Heavenly Bao Continent after 6 hours, he wouldn't be able to escape from the Dark Star Emperor's grasp. However, what the Dark Star Emperor didn't expect was that after only an hour, Yi Xing had stopped cultivating. The star energy in his body had finished transforming. Chapter 903. The Heavenly Bao Continent was facing the joint attack of the three Emperor Gods. Ingui was also very anxious. Seeing Yi Xing stand up, Ingui's eyes lit up. Yi Xing, you have completed the transformation? Yi Xing opened his god's eyes of Void Breaker and saw the three real gods attacking the Heavenly Bao Continent. The Heavenly Bao Continent could not hold on for much longer. Yi Xing retracted his gaze and nodded with a smile. I have completed it. Senior Ingui, how can I go to the Star Secret Realm? Ingui said, in the Heavenly Bao Palace, there is a restriction formation that leads to the deepest part of the Star Secret Realm. You only need to use the Sagittarius constellation to activate it. Alright. Yi Xing used the Sagittarius constellation with a thought. The inner palace of the Heavenly Bao Palace immediately sensed it. Dense formation runes appeared in the void. It was an extremely complicated teleportation formation. Kacha. The coffin in the inner palace suddenly made a soft sound and a figure floated out of the coffin. Ingui immediately flew toward the figure and said excitedly, Master. The figure was real God Tiangong. Yi Xing also hurriedly bowed. Senior Heavenly Bao. Real God Tiangong nodded at Ingui and his gaze fell on Yi Xing. My last wish has finally been fulfilled. Young man, you are very good. This teleportation formation will send you to the deepest part of the Star Secret Realm and you will start the core trial of the Star Secret Realm directly. I wish you good luck in obtaining the true inheritance of Star Sovereign and the method to become a supreme martial artist. As he spoke, Real God Tiangong waved his hand and the silver dragon heaven shooting bow that was fighting with the Dark Star Emperor disappeared from the sky of the Heavenly Bao Continent and appeared in Real God Tiangong's hand. Then Real God Tiangong waved his hand and the silver dragon heaven shooting bow flew into his hand. Real God Tiangong's figure started to fade and he continued, Go, the silver dragon heaven shooting bow is a treasure that I obtained from the Star Secret Realm. May it accompany you and bring you good luck. As soon as he finished speaking, Real God Tiangong's figure completely disappeared. Real God Tiangong had already passed away for 20,000 years and he had only used a special method to seal a bit of his consciousness. Now that the seal had been removed, he naturally wouldn't exist for long and he would vanish from the universe. Plus, it was because the consciousness was too small that Real God Tiangong didn't notice the willpower of soul that the Dark Star Emperor had left in Yi Xing's body. If Real God Tiangong was still alive and Yi Xing was in front of him, Real God Tiangong would definitely notice. At the same time that Real God Tiangong's figure disappeared, the teleportation formation in the inner hall took effect completely. Yi Xing was instantly pulled into the dimensional void and he was shuttling through the void at an extremely fast speed in the teleportation tunnel. No. The Dark Star Emperor knew that Yi Xing had left the Heavenly Bao Continent and headed towards the Star Secret Realm, and he roared furiously. Originally, Yi Xing was a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace. Moreover, the Dark Star Emperor had noticed this disciple and summoned him once. If he wanted to capture Yi Xing, then it would be a piece of cake. However, fate made fools of people. At that time, the Dark Star Emperor didn't know that Yi Xing possessed the supreme astrology. By the time he found out, it was already too late. Yi Xing had already entered the Heavenly Bao Continent. In order to control Yi Xing, the Dark Star Emperor didn't hesitate to destroy the entire Heavenly Bao Continent. He didn't hesitate to take out 10 upper-grade god-level treasures and asked Emperor Xinghe and Emperor Guang to attack together. For the past 20,000 years, Among all the treasures that were produced in the Heavenly Bow continent, there wasn't a single upper-grade god-level treasure. The total value of all the treasures produced couldn't be compared to the 10 upper-grade god-level treasures that the Dark Star Emperor had taken out. The Dark Star Emperor had paid such a huge price, but he still couldn't get what he wanted. Seeing that the Heavenly Bow continent's prohibition formation was about to be completely destroyed, Yixing once again changed his location and escaped from his control. Moreover, the place that Yixing headed to this time was the Star Secret Realm. That was the real forbidden area of the real gods. In the Heavenly Bow continent, the Dark Star Emperor could still use force. However, in the Star Secret Realm, the Dark Star Emperor couldn't do anything at all. Trying to break open the Star Secret Realm by force? Not to mention one Dark Star Emperor, even 10 Dark Star Emperors or 100 Dark Star Emperors working together wouldn't be able to break through the Star Secret Realm. Martial Dao Supremes were more than just a little stronger than real gods. It was like the difference between a mortal and a god. Once Yixing entered the Star Secret Realm, he was completely out of the Dark Star Emperor's control. Other than waiting, the Dark Star Emperor couldn't do anything at all. After paying such a huge price for nothing, how could the Dark Star Emperor not be angry? He started to attack randomly. Emperor Xinghe and Emperor Guang quickly stopped and retreated far away. The current Dark Star Emperor was almost crazy. Both of them felt a little scared. After a few breaths, the Dark Star Emperor finally calmed down. Emperor Xinghe asked, "Dark Star Emperor, are we still going to break the Heavenly Bow continent's prohibition spell?" The Dark Star Emperor had nowhere to vent his anger. He blamed the Heavenly Bow True God for not being able to catch Yixing. Looking at the Heavenly Bow continent in front of him, the anger in his heart grew stronger. The Dark Star Emperor shouted, "Break! I want this Star Secret Realm to be completely destroyed and disappear forever." In just 2 breaths, Yixing passed through the space tunnel and appeared in a vast starry sky. Below Yixing's feet, there was a huge meteorite. It was bare and still in the starry sky. In front of him there was a void. In the distance there were countless stars. Among them, from the nearest to the furthest, there were 3 stars that were especially bright. Beside Yixing there was a slight ripple in the void. A man in a red robe appeared. The man in the red robe had exquisite facial features, as if he was a sculpture. He was unbelievably handsome. Yixing's reaction was not weaker than that of a beginner quasi-god. However, he did not sense the handsome man in the red robe who had suddenly appeared. The handsome man in the red robe sighed, "It's been 20,000 years. Finally, someone has come to the last level of the Stellar Hall." Hearing the voice, Yixing realized that there was someone beside him. He was shocked. Yixing immediately stepped back. He looked at the handsome man in the red robe and asked, "Who are you?" The handsome man in the red robe also looked at Yixing. "I'm the weapon spirit of the Stellar Hall, Xing Chen. For millions of years, only a few people have been able to come to the last level of the Stellar Hall. It's really lonely. Junior, you have to work hard. Don't be like those useless people who couldn't even pass the first level." It was the real Stellar Hall's weapon spirit and not the imitation weapon spirit of Stellar Hall that Mr. Tortoise had. Even the silver dragon sky shooting bow that real god Tiangong had left behind was a supreme-grade divine weapon. As Stellar Hall was a treasure of Stellar Hall, it was definitely a supreme weapon of a higher grade. The weapon spirit of the supreme weapon Yixing was in awe. Junior Yixing greets Senior Xing Chen. Xing Chen nodded slightly. He looked at Yixing with a joyful expression. A supreme-grade imperial body, 2 supreme astrological aspects, and the chaos whole astrological aspect that can devour others' heavens will to improve the grade of your own astrological aspect. TSK. Yixing, you are the most talented person I've seen in the past millions of years. It seems that you have hope of passing the test. Chapter 904. Yixing's expression suddenly turned into shock. Even reincarnation supremacy did not see that he had a supreme celestial form. However, the weapon spirit star could see through it at a glance. It was unbelievable. Moreover, the weapon spirit star recognized Yixing's supreme celestial form. The supreme celestial form that he had always called the black hole celestial form was not called the black hole celestial form, but the chaotic hole celestial form. What shocked Yixing even more was that the weapon spirit star had explained the functions of the chaotic whole celestial form. Devouring other people's fates and absorbing energy to strengthen the celestial form was Yixing's most crucial trump card. It was what he relied on to compete with any genius. The weapon spirit star smiled faintly at Yixing's reaction. "You don't have to be so nervous. The Star Palace is a world of its own. As the weapon spirit, I can do anything. You can't hide any secrets from me. Not only can I see your celestial form, but I also know that there is a true god of archery soul will in your body that is monitoring your every move. Yixing was shocked. The true god of archery soul will? The weapon spirit star raised its hand, and a ray of light was sucked out of Yixing's body. It was a small figure that looked exactly like the Dark Star Emperor. The weapon spirit star squeezed its hand, and the figure was crushed into nothingness. Knowing that the Dark Star Emperor's soul will was in his body, Yixing's doubts were finally resolved. It seemed that the Dark Star Emperor had attacked the Heavenly Bao continent because of Yixing. Before Yixing entered the Heavenly Bao continent, he had used the Supreme Celestial Form, the Chaotic Whole Celestial Form. Since the Dark Star Emperor's soul will was in his body, the Dark Star Emperor must have known about it at that time. Yixing was terrified when he thought about the soul will hidden in his body that was like a pair of eyes that were constantly monitoring him. Yixing hurriedly expressed his gratitude to Star. Thank you, Senior Star. Xingchen waved his hand and said, I haven't moved for millions of years, so I'm really lonely. If you can complete the test, you can take me everywhere in the future. That would be the greatest gratitude. Yixing said confidently, Junior will do his best to complete the test. The device spirit nodded with a smile. This is the last level of Star Palace. It's the final test left by Star Sovereign. There are 3 tests in total. Do you see the 3 brightest stars in the sky? There's a test on each star. Only after passing the test on the first star can you proceed to the next star. If you pass all the tests on the 3 stars, you'll get the real legacy of Star Sovereign. Yixing had already noticed the 3 brightest stars in the sky. His eyes were filled with excitement. Then Star took out a token and handed it to Yixing. The time limit for each test is 60 years. If you don't complete the test after 60 years, you'll be automatically teleported out of the Star Secret Realm. If you encounter any life-threatening danger during the test, you can crush the token and give up on the test. You can be teleported out of the Star Secret Realm directly. Yixing, are you ready? Yixing took the token and said, I'm ready. Xingchen waved his hand. Then, the test begins now. Remember, only after you complete the first test will you be able to see the rest of the path. There will be no instructions for the test. Everything is up to you. Go. A void passage appeared in front of the meteorite. It led to a faraway place and connected to the nearest shining star. After the weapon spirit star finished speaking, it disappeared without a trace. Yixing bowed respectfully in the direction where Star Artifact Spirit Star had disappeared. He then entered the void tunnel and flew forward. In the void passage there was a void current. Yixing flew along with the void current. He could travel tens of thousands of miles in one breath. His speed was more than 10 times faster. Even so, the distance between him and the first shining star was still terrifyingly far. Yixing didn't know how many billions of kilometers he had to fly for 5 days to reach it. It was a real star. It was a round planet. It wasn't a square continent like Yixing had seen before. No matter where Yixing had been before, whether it was the Star Continent or the Outer Realm Star Continent, they were all square continents. They weren't round planets. Only the astrological signs, except for some special signs, were round planets. Moreover, there was one more thing that was different from the Star Continent Yixing had been to. There was no space barrier around this planet. Instead, it was protected by an atmosphere. Beyond the atmosphere was the starry sky. Compared to the Outer Realm Star Continent, which was millions of miles in radius, or the Star Continent, which was tens of millions of miles in radius, this planet was very small. Yixing's god eyes could easily see through the entire planet. It was less than 100,000 miles in diameter. There was only one continent on the planet's surface. It took up about 30% of the planet's surface. The rest of the planet was an ocean with some small islands scattered in the ocean. Yixing stood outside the atmosphere. First, he used his god eyes to check the entire planet. He checked both inside and outside. However, he didn't find any clues leading to the next star. He also didn't know what the test on this planet was. After a while, Yixing shifted his focus to the continent. There were many ferocious beasts living in the ocean. On the continent there were many humans. Although the continent was only 30% of the planet's surface, it was still tens of thousands of miles in radius. There were hundreds of millions of humans living there. After observing for a while, Yixing had a rough understanding of the human society on this planet. The humans here also practiced martial arts. The strongest martial artist was a quasi-god. The king realm was very common. The entire continent was unified by a divine dynasty called the Dawei Divine Dynasty. Yixing stood high in the clouds and looked down at the earth. His god eyes were everywhere. After a while, he had a rough idea of the Dawei Divine Dynasty's system. The Dawei Divine Dynasty was different from any other regime Yixing had seen. It was a dynasty with absolute centralization of power. The emperor was the emperor, and civil and military officials ruled the world. It was a bit like the feudal dynasties on Earth. The regimes that Yixing had seen in the various star continents in the martial arts world were all authoritarian. The sect forces maintained the regime and the large and small sect forces ruled the world. However, the Dawei Divine Dynasty didn't have any sect forces. It only had the government and the imperial court. Yixing guessed, the ocean is vast but there are only countless ferocious beasts. It shouldn't have much to do with the test. There are many humans on the continent and the Dawei Divine Dynasty has unified the world. Could it be that the first test has something to do with the Dawei Divine Dynasty? There were no hints in the first test. The test depended on oneself. Although Yixing understood a lot with his god eyes, he still didn't have a clue. Chapter 907. The Greenwood sect leader quickly returned to Yixing, his face full of shock. You killed the governor of the eastern state? You're a 9-star king? The Greenwood sect leader stared at Yixing in disbelief, his voice full of shock. Can't a 9-star king kill a 2-nirvana quasi-god? Yixing's tone was extremely calm, as if he had done something extremely ordinary. Yixing had killed a 2-nirvana quasi-god when he was an 8-star king. Now that he was a 9-star king and had cultivated the stellar glass art, his strength had undergone tremendous changes. Killing a 2-nirvana quasi-god was indeed a piece of cake for him. He did not even use the chaos whole celestial form to kill the governor of the eastern state. TSK. There has never been a 9-star king in the Dawei Divine Dynasty who could kill a 2-nirvana quasi-god. The Greenwood sect leader's voice was still shocked, but his eyes were filled with hope. You killed the governor of the eastern state so easily. Your strength must have reached the level of a 3-nirvana quasi-god. Only the emperor of the Dawei Divine Dynasty is a 3-nirvana quasi-god. If you can kill the emperor of the Dawei Divine Dynasty, you can replace him, become the emperor, and start a new divine dynasty. Although the Greenwood sect leader was a quasi-god in the Dawei Divine Dynasty, he did not have a deity position conferred by the emperor. He was an evil god. It was not easy to cultivate to become a quasi-god. In the martial world, the strong were respected. A quasi-god expert should be high and mighty, and not become an evil god because of a person's words and live a sneaky life under the pursuit of the imperial court. The Greenwood sect leader naturally hated the emperor of the Dawei Divine Dynasty. Yixing shook his head. I'm not interested in becoming the emperor, nor am I interested in starting a divine dynasty. As long as the emperor of the Dawei Divine Dynasty doesn't provoke me, I'll live in peace with him. The Greenwood sect leader said, the governor is the governor of a territory. The entire Dawei Divine Dynasty is divided into 9 states, and there are only 9 governors in total. They are the highest deity positions conferred by the emperor. You killed the governor of the eastern state, so the emperor of the Dawei Divine Dynasty will not let you go. It's impossible for you to live in peace. The leader of the Greenwood sect was right. Emperor Dawei would never let Yixing go. The viceroy's deity position conferred by Emperor Dawei contained the will of the emperor, allowing him to govern the world on behalf of the emperor. The fall of the eastern state's viceroy was immediately sensed by Emperor Dawei. The death of the governor was a major event in the Divine Dynasty. The Emperor of Dawei immediately sent out an imperial edict to lead the civil and military ministers, the 6 ministers, and the imperial guards to the eastern state through the transmission array. After Yixing killed the eastern state's governor, he did not leave. Not long after, Emperor Dawei arrived with his men. At this time the Greenwood sect leader had already fled. He did not dare to confront the Emperor of Dawei. Otherwise, if Yixing was defeated, only death would await him. The civil and martial ministers, the ministers of the 6 ministries and the commander of the imperial army were all 2nd nirvana quasi-gods. Their deity positions were comparable to that of the 9 states governor. These 18 people were the highest deity positions bestowed by the emperor of great might. In addition, the soldiers of the imperial army were all kings. 1,000 soldiers formed an army, and each army commander was a quasi-god 1 nirvana. The Dawei imperial army was divided into 36 armies. The Emperor of Dawei personally led half of the imperial army, a total of 18 armies and 18,000 soldiers. The Emperor of Dawei looked at Yi Xing from afar. His expression was dignified and his voice was loud and clear. "Is it you who killed the Eastern States governor that I appointed?" Yi Xing's expression was normal. Although the opponent had a quasi-god 3 nirvana, 9 second nirvana quasi-gods, 18 first nirvana quasi-gods, and more than 10,000 kings, Yi Xing was not afraid at all. Yi Xing looked at the Emperor of Dawei and said, "He was courting death. Emperor of Dawei, don't follow in his footsteps." "How dare you?" The Emperor of Dawei roared, and a terrifying aura erupted. He looked at the commander of the Imperial Army. "Commander, I'll leave this thief to you. You must capture him alive and extract his essence to refine the longevity pill." The commander of the Imperial Army bowed respectfully. "Yes, Emperor." After getting up, the commander of the Imperial Army swept his gaze over the Imperial Army. "First to 9th armies, follow me to capture this thief alive." Half of the 18 Imperial Army soldiers remained motionless while the other half followed the commander of the Imperial Army's orders and flew out in unison. The 9 armies of the Imperial Army spread out, each led by a quasi-god 1 nirvana. They formed a 9-palace formation that trapped Yi Xing within. The commander of the Imperial Army was at the eye of the 9-palace god-trapping formation. He gathered the power of the formation, greatly increasing his strength as he looked down on Yi Xing. The Grand Marshal of the Imperial Army was originally a 2nd nirvana quasi-god, but with the addition of 10 first nirvana quasi-gods and 9,000 kings, his strength had increased by a large margin. He was now comparable to a 3rd nirvana quasi-god. Moreover, the formation trapped the enemy. Unless one had the power to break the formation, they would not be able to escape. Any 2nd nirvana quasi-god surrounded would have no way to escape. Whether they could be killed or captured was up to the array's master. The commander of the Imperial Army released his astrology, and the other 10 quasi-god commanders and 9,000 soldiers also used their astrology. More than 9,000 astrology lit up the sky like a river of stars. "Thief, why haven't you surrendered yet?" the commander of the Imperial Army roared, using his voice to intimidate. Under the might of the army, a single roar would cause the will of an ordinary person to crumble and their heart to tremble in fear. Yi Xing's eyes focused, and his gaze suddenly became sharp. A terrifying aura erupted as 2 beams of starlight soared into the sky. He had used the Vermilion Bird astrology and the Sagittarius astrology at the same time. The flame arrow on the azure sandalwood divine bow had long since been drawn, and the power of the 2 celestial manifestations was terrifying to the extreme. The power contained in the flame arrow was much stronger than when it had killed the Eastern Province governor. It had completely reached the level of a quasi-god 4th nirvana. "You won't shed tears until you see the coffin." The commander of the Imperial Army roared. He put on his divine glove and extended his hand, which transformed into a 10,000-foot-long hand that descended from the sky and grabbed at Yi Xing. The other 10 quasi-god commanders and the 1,000 Imperial Army soldiers behind them joined together to form chains of energy that shot toward Yi Xing. "Kill!" Yi Xing's killing intent erupted. With a roar, the flame arrow left the bow and transformed into a 10,000-foot-long astral arrow. The might of this arrow was peerlessly terrifying, not one bit weaker than the attack of a quasi-god 4 nirvana. The descending astral hand was instantly shattered by the flame arrow. The flame arrow's momentum was like a rainbow as it continued toward the commander of the Imperial Army. At the same time, the azure cloud wings appeared behind Yi Xing's back. Using his minor success true intent of wind, he began to move like a ghost. The 10 energy chains all brushed past Yi Xing as he dodged them all. While it seemed like Yi Xing had narrowly avoided the attacks of the energy chains, in truth, Yi Xing had controlled his speed perfectly, not wasting a single bit of energy. He had just managed to avoid the attacks of the 10 energy chains. The commander of the Imperial Army did not have Yi Xing's speed. Although he had the support of the array and his strength had reached the level of a quasi-god 3 nirvana, making it impossible for the spatial binding energy to restrain him, he still had no time to dodge the arrows. Chapter 9:13. Yi Xing racked his brains. If there was no other way, even if he hid in the palace, once the 60 years were up, he would fail the second test and be teleported out of the star's secret realm. Humans would only come up with new ideas when they were forced into a corner. Yi Xing racked his brains for a few hours. Suddenly an idea popped up in his mind. If he combined the different Dao intents into one, would he be able to unleash an even stronger power? Currently, when Yi Xing attacked, he was able to fuse the Wind Dao True Intent, Fire Dao True Intent, and Darkness Dao True Intent into his attacks. However, this was just three types of energy converging together and not fusing with each other. Even though the power was greatly increased, there wasn't a qualitative breakthrough. Yixing was thinking that if he could fuse the different true intents of the great Tao into one and become an inseparable whole, its might should be much stronger. It was like two ropes. The strength of intertwined ropes was much stronger than when they were placed side by side. The more Yixing thought about it, the more he felt that it was feasible. Every true meaning of the Great Path was extremely mysterious and contained extremely powerful might. If he could fuse different true meanings of the Great Path into one, the collision of the mysterious forces would definitely be able to produce a miracle of 1 + 1 greater than 2. A type of true intent represented a type of great Tao. The fusion of true intents was a collision between Tao and Tao. The resulting power was extremely mysterious and miraculous. Yixing didn't know that this kind of power was called a mystique in martial arts. Divine abilities required great wisdom, great perception, and even great fortune in order to create them. Even for true divinity powerhouses, it was extremely rare for them to be able to create divine abilities. However, Yixing had a super brain. His brain's calculation speed was faster than a true god. To him, the only thing he was afraid of was not having a path and a direction to advance. Once there was a direction to advance, the super brain's existence would be greatly reduced. The mysterious Tao intents of wind, Tao intents of fire, and Tao intents of darkness were scanned by the super brain into data. The data was extremely complicated. With the brain power of a quasi-god, it was impossible to study it. However, in Yixing's super brain it was orderly. Yixing tried to fuse the data of the three true intents together. In the end, it was so complicated that even Yixing's super brain couldn't handle it. If the data of the three true intents were all 10, then when they were fused together, there would be a total of 10 times by 10 times. There would be a total of 1,000 types of true intents, and the difficulty would be increased by 100 times. If the numbers were all 100, then when they were combined together, it would be 100 times 100 times 100 permutations. There would be a total of 1 million permutations, and the difficulty would be increased by 10,000 times. Yixing had already comprehended the three true meanings of darkness, wind, and fire to minor completion. The super brain had turned them into data, and the information was extremely complicated. There were more than billions of them. The difficulty of fusing the three true meanings was billions of times more difficult. It was no wonder that even the super brain found it strenuous. There were so many combinations that the super brain would need a long time to sort them out. After many attempts, Yixing decisively stopped fusing the three true intents and changed it to fusing 2. After many more attempts, Yixing set the fusion target as the true intents of fire and darkness. Perhaps it was because of his astrology. The vermilion bird astrology contained the path of fire, while the chaos hole astrology contained the path of darkness. Yixing could clearly feel that the true intents of fire and darkness were the most compatible with his body. The difficulty of fusing them was also the lowest. However, even if the difficulty was the lowest, the fusion of two true intents was still extremely complicated. A true god could live for 30,000 years, and those who could create divine abilities were 1 in a million. From this, it could be seen that even if the difficulty was lower, it was only relatively speaking. It still required a long time of experimentation, exploration, and verification. The true intents of darkness and fire kept colliding and fusing. Time passed as he failed again and again. As time passed and the number of attempts increased, there would occasionally be a glimmer of hope, and a partial fusion would occur. However, for two different true intents to truly fuse into one, it was obviously impossible to rely on a partial fusion. The slightest change would cause the partial fusion to fall apart, and it would be extremely unstable. However, even if it was only a partial fusion, Yixing could still feel a powerful and surging power. He could imagine that if he could really fuse them completely, the power of the two true intents would definitely be able to erupt. It would not just be an addition. With the partial fusion phenomenon, Yixing would occasionally leave the space in the hall and fight with the iron-winged golden demon condor that was guarding outside the replica of Stellar Hall. He wanted to verify his results in battle. The dual verification of theory and practice could speed up the speed of success and save him a lot of detours. Yixing would only leave the space in the hall once in a while. There was only one iron-winged golden demon condor guarding outside. However, as time passed, Yixing's fusion of the two true intents became more and more effective. When he left the space in the hall, the number of times he fought with the iron-winged golden demon condor became more frequent. The more effective the fusion of true intents became, the stronger the power. Yi Xing's killing power towards the iron-winged golden demon condor became greater and greater. The iron-winged golden demon condor couldn't take it anymore and gradually increased its guarding power. It went from 1 to 2 and then to 3. Yi Xing had been immersed in the fusion of true intents. He had almost forgotten about the passage of time. To him, a month or a year had passed in the blink of an eye. 6 years later, a certain day had arrived. Yi Xing's super brain had fused the true intents of darkness and fire countless times. Along the way there were countless partial fusions. Finally, on this day the fusion of the two true intents showed a qualitative improvement. It fused together stably. Although the fusion of the two true intents couldn't be considered perfect, it was more than 90% complete. The fusion of the two true intents was inseparable. The power it contained was terrifying even to Yi Xing. Yi Xing stretched out his finger. A black flame arrow shot out from his fingertip. This black flame arrow was as black as ink and scorching hot. It was formed by the fusion of the true intents of darkness and fire. Its power was terrifying. It also contained the power of the Tao of archery and had extreme penetrative power. Once this black flame arrow penetrated the defense, the damage it would cause would be absolutely devastating. Looking at the black flame arrow, Yi Xing said slowly, "You're formed by the fusion of the true intents of darkness and fire. I'll call you the Dark Fire Arrow." The Dark Fire Arrow sounded like a very ordinary name. However, the power it contained was definitely not ordinary. Looking at the Dark Fire Arrow, Yi Xing took a deep breath. His face lit up. Now, it's time to take care of these iron-winged golden demon condors. With a thought, Yi Xing left the space in the hall. The replica of the stellar hall shrunk and was put away by Yi Xing. At this moment, there were 3 iron-winged golden demon condors guarding the replica. Their reactions were extremely fast. The moment Yi Xing appeared, their sharp eyes locked onto him. Chapter 9:14. The 3 iron-winged golden demonic condors shrieked at the same time, notifying the other iron-winged golden demonic condors and attacking Yi Xing at the same time. One of the iron-winged golden demonic condors slashed at Yi Xing's waist, while the other reached out for Yi Xing's head. The last one had a sharp beak like a sword, aiming for Yi Xing's chest. If he was hit, Yi Xing's body would instantly shatter into pieces, and he would die instantly. Facing the attacks of the 3 iron-winged golden demonic condors, Yi Xing's lips curled into a smile, his expression full of confidence. Whoosh, the azure cloud wings appeared behind him, and Yi Xing used the windshadow escape technique to retreat rapidly. At the same time, Yi Xing stretched out his hand and pointed 3 fingers in succession, using the Dark Fire Arrow. 3 pitch-black flame arrows shot out, respectively shooting towards the 3 iron-winged golden demonic condors. 3 screams rang out at the same time. Whether it was the iron-winged golden demonic condors or the golden demonic condor's beak, they were all destroyed by the Dark Fire Arrow. The Dark Fire Arrow looked like a pitch-black arrow, but the power it contained was too terrifying. The iron-winged golden demonic condors could not withstand it at all, and all of them retreated as if they had been electrocuted. However, the terror of the Dark Fire Arrow had only just begun. The Dark Fire Arrow was extremely fast, and directly shot into the bodies of the 3 iron-winged golden demonic condors. The bodies of the iron-winged golden demonic condors were rapidly pulverized from the inside out. Even though the iron-winged golden demonic condors had abundant vitality at this moment, it was like a torrential river, and they lost 50 to 60% of their vitality in the blink of an eye. More than half of the 3 iron-winged golden demonic condors' bodies had been pulverized. Although they had regrown their flesh, their eyes were filled with fear. The destructive power of the Dark Fire Arrow was too terrifying. At most, 2 arrows were enough to kill an iron-winged golden demonic condor. It was a long story, but Yi Xing's battle with the 3 iron-winged golden demonic condors had only lasted for about 2 breaths. At this time, the iron-winged golden demonic condors had just rushed out of the mountain. The 3 iron-winged golden demonic condors did not dare to continue fighting Yi Xing, and turned to retreat at the same time and fled. At the same time, they let out an impassioned scream. This scream was different from the previous one. It was clearly a warning to their companions. Yi Xing raised his hand and the azure sandalwood divine bow instantly appeared in his hand. Swoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 arrows were shot consecutively. Yi Xing was using a mystique and not the gray flame void annihilation arrow art. He did not need a second to condense the arrow. The Dark Fire Tao arrow could be released instantly. The 3 dark fire Dao arrows were more than twice as fast as the Iron-Wing Golden Fiend Condors. They caught up to the 3 fleeing Iron-Wing Golden Fiend Condors in an instant. After being attacked by the dark fire Dao arrow for the second time, the life force of the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors was instantly destroyed. Their flesh turned into granules and they could no longer regrow their flesh. They all died. Before the rest of the Iron-Winged Golden Demonic Condors arrived, the 3 Iron-Winged Golden Demonic Condors guarding outside the Star Hall had already lost their lives. This result shocked all the Iron-Winged Golden Demon Condors. After Yi Xing killed the 3 Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors, he flew towards the rest of the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors. He drew his bow continuously. The Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow shot out dark fire Dao arrows one after another. The Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors could not withstand the attacks of the dark fire Dao arrows at all. Even their sturdiest claws could not withstand the attacks. The Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors that were hit by the arrows all screamed in agony. The terror of a mystique was not only in the strength of the attack, but also in the profoundness of the power. Unless there was an absolute suppression of cultivation, there was no way to withstand it. Just a touch would cause great damage. All the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors flew out of the stone mountain and charged towards Yi Xing. They screeched and their ferocious nature was on full display. With the mystique that Yi Xing had created, these Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors were no longer worth mentioning. He drew his Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow repeatedly and shot out dark fire Dao arrows one after another. None of the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors could withstand them. The Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors would be severely injured by 1 arrow and their vitality would be greatly damaged. 2 arrows would kill them. Yi Xing drew his bow again and again. How fast was Yi Xing? In the blink of an eye, several Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors were killed. In less than 10 breaths, more than half of them were dead. Although the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors were ferocious, they were also terrified at this moment. They did not dare to fight anymore and fled. Yi Xing shot arrows continuously. The speed of the dark fire Dao arrows was much faster than the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors. In the blink of an eye, a few more Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors were killed. Whoosh! Yi Xing used the Azure Cloud Wings and the Windshadow Mystic Evasion technique. In a breath he chased after them. His speed was even faster than the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors. He chased after them one by one. Not long after, all the escaping Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors were killed. The 36 Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors on this planet were all dead. Rumble, the stone mountain that the Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors lived in suddenly changed. It bloomed with brilliant light that rushed into the sky and extended into the depths of the starry sky. Yi Xing was right. The second trial tested one's strength, and the 36 Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors were the targets. Once the 36 Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condors died, the second trial was considered completed. The passage to the third trial planet appeared immediately. In front of Yi Xing, the void rippled, and the artifact spirit Xing Chen appeared again. Looking at Yi Xing, the artifact spirit Xing Chen's eyes were filled with joy. Very good. Very good. Very good. You were able to create divine abilities when you were a 9-star king. You have completed the second trial. This was the first time Yi Xing had heard about divine abilities. He was puzzled. What is a divine ability? The artifact spirit Xing Chen said, the fusion of different great Dao intents will form a divine ability. TSK. Those who can create divine abilities are extremely rare even among true gods. Continue to work hard and persevere. I look forward to seeing your figure at the end. After saying this, the artifact spirit Xing Chen smiled at Yi Xing and disappeared. So, the dark fire Dao arrow that I created is a divine ability? It is extremely rare for true gods to create divine abilities. No wonder the dark fire Dao arrow is so terrifying. The Iron-Winged Golden Fiend Condor's vitality is more than 1,000 times greater than mine, but they were still killed by the dark fire Dao arrow in 2 shots. For someone with my vitality, 1 shot from the dark fire Dao arrow can kill thousands of people. How terrifying. Yi Xing was pleasantly surprised and shocked. He was extremely excited. After taking a few deep breaths, Yi Xing calmed himself down and looked toward the void passage that led to the depths of the starry sky. The first trial tested one's temperament. The second trial tested one's strength. The third trial should be different from the first 2. I wonder what it will test. Yi Xing thought to himself as he entered the void passage. Following the void current, Yi Xing's speed increased by more than 10 times as he flew toward the planet of the third trial. Compared to the distance between the first and second trial planets, The distance between the second and third trial planets was even greater. After flying for an entire month, Yixing finally arrived at the planet of the third trial. Yixing was sent directly to the planet of the third trial. There were raging flames on both sides, and there was only a small path that led forward. Yixing stood at the beginning of the path. The flames on both sides were more than 10 feet tall and they were extremely hot. Yixing looked around with his void-piercing god eye and his face was filled with shock. Chapter 9:15. Yixing's void-breaker god eye had actually lost its effect, and it was no different from what he could see with his naked eyes. The void-breaker god eye had a total of 3 levels. When Yixing cultivated the first level, he could see through space. Even if it was a starry sky continent with a radius of hundreds of millions of miles, the void-breaker god eye's vision could still penetrate it. However, the flames on both sides had the effect of blocking the vision of the void-breaker god eye. Yixing's void-breaker god eye could not see through these flames. The path in front of him was not a straight line. After just a few dozen meters, it curved a little to the right. Therefore, the path ahead of him was still filled with flames, and the void-breaker god eye could not see through it. The flames on both sides were extremely hot. Yixing used the minor success true meaning of the fire Tao, but he could not block it. Even if he stimulated the star fire seed, he could not attract it. This burning sensation caused Yixing to feel bursts of pain. Although with the vitality of a top-grade imperial body, this burning sensation could not affect Yixing's life, but it still felt very uncomfortable. Yixing wanted to go up to the sky and stand above the flames to look at this planet. However, he found that the void was shrouded in an invisible force. As long as his feet left the ground, this invisible force was like a mountain that could not be lifted. It immediately pushed Yixing back to the ground. On this flaming planet, one could not fly, nor could one use eye techniques to see through it. Everything was unknown, and there was only a small path leading to the front. Yixing stared at the small path for a while before his eyes shifted to the flames on the side. He then stretched out his right hand and reached into the flames. A sharp pain immediately spread. As soon as Yixing's palm came into contact with the flames, it was immediately incinerated into ashes. As if he had received an electric shock, Yixing immediately retracted his right hand. His flesh and blood wriggled and regrew a new palm. Looking at the flames on both sides, Yixing's eyes were filled with dread. These flames were so terrifying that if he entered, he would soon be incinerated into ashes. Even if his flesh and blood regrew, he would not be able to hold on for long. Yixing's gaze once again turned to the path that led to an unknown destination. Other than following the path forward, there seemed to be no other feasible path. Yixing took a step forward. Because his legs couldn't leave the ground at the same time, he couldn't use his speed at all. Every step he took was the same as a normal person's, only about half a meter away. Every time Yixing wanted to increase his speed, when his feet left the ground at the same time, the invisible force would suppress him. Yixing had no choice but to walk forward step by step like an ordinary person. At this speed, he would probably only be able to travel a little more than 100 miles in an entire day. However, Yixing's current flying speed was 3,000 miles in a breath. This meant that the distance he could cover in a breath would take him about a month. Yixing's current speed was like a tortoise crawling. It was too slow, but he could only walk slowly. There was nothing he could do. This feeling of having strength but not being able to use it was very sullen. Yixing took a deep breath and exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He adjusted his mood and maintained his calm. He followed the path and walked forward step by step. This path was always winding. The straight line distance never exceeded 100 meters. Yixing couldn't see the situation in front of him. He could only explore like a blind man, walking forward in an unknown direction. As he walked, Yixing was constantly alert, guarding against the flames on both sides of the path. There might be some danger. However, apart from boredom, there wasn't any danger along the way. From the beginning of the meteorite to the first planet, from the first planet to the second planet, from the second planet to the third planet, Yixing had experienced a long period of boring flying. Especially from the second planet to the third planet, Yixing had flown through the void passage for a full month. Having experienced these boring experiences, Yixing's resistance to boredom was still quite strong. Moreover, when cultivators cultivated, they would sometimes go into closed-door cultivation for a year or so, or even several years at a time. They were naturally able to endure loneliness, so Yixing did not feel too bored during the first few months of his journey. However, after Yixing had walked on this path of flames for over a year, the environment was still the same. There were eternal flames on both sides and there was no end in sight. Yixing felt a sense of dejection in his heart. Along the way Yixing had been in high spirits at the beginning. He had always been on guard against any danger that might appear from the flames on both sides. But after walking for over a year there was no danger at all. There was only boredom and loneliness. The first stage tested one's temperament, the second stage tested one's strength, and this third stage should be a test of perseverance? Thinking back to the past year, he had been walking on this path of flames. There had been no danger, no obstacles, and besides being a little slow, the path had been smooth. There was only loneliness and boredom accompanying him. It was irritating and depressing. Thinking that this stage should be a test of perseverance, the dejection in Yixing's heart immediately dissipated. His eyes flashed and his fighting spirit continued to soar. The first and second stages were already difficult. No matter what, he couldn't fail in this third stage. Since it was a test, there had to be an end to this path. Step by step, Yixing walked forward. His heart was filled with hope. As long as he completed this stage, he would be able to obtain Sovereign Star's inheritance. Yixing was filled with incomparable anticipation for the inheritance of a sovereign. And this anticipation turned into motivation, driving Yixing forward and maintaining a high fighting spirit. Time slowly passed as Yixing walked step by step. Another year passed. On both sides of Yixing were eternal flames, and in front of him was a path with no end in sight. The end of this path is just ahead. Sovereign Star's inheritance is waiting for me. Yixing's spirit was always in an excited state. The light of hope in his eyes didn't extinguish as he continued forward. The fourth year, the fifth year, the sixth year, time passed year after year. Yixing kept walking forward on the path of flames. Even though he kept repeating that Sovereign Star's inheritance was waiting for him in front, he still hadn't reached the end after walking for a full 7 years. He couldn't help but feel mentally and physically exhausted. His dejection was becoming more and more obvious. Did I make a mistake? Could this be an illusion? Could this path actually have no end and I won't be able to finish it even if I walk to my death? As time passed, the thoughts in Yixing's mind became more and more complicated. He began to doubt himself and no longer firmly believed that Sovereign Star's inheritance was waiting for him in front. Yixing felt his legs getting heavier and heavier. The difficulty of taking a step was much more difficult than at the beginning. This was due to mental exhaustion. Stop. This path has no end at all. All your efforts are in vain. Continuing forward is also in vain. A voice began to appear in Yixing's mind. His body and mind were exhausted. He wanted to listen to this voice and stop right there. Chapter 9:17. Just stay here and refine the Sovereign's blood. Once you're done, you'll receive the Sovereign's inheritance left behind by Star Sovereign. The artifact spirit, Xing Qin, said before disappearing. Yixing looked at the golden blood in front of him with excitement. It took him a while to calm down. Letting out a long breath, Yixing sat on the ground and circulated the stellar glass art. The stellar glass art was the inheritance left behind by Star Sovereign. Obviously, it was a cultivation method that Star Sovereign had practiced before. The power in Star Sovereign's blood was very close to the stellar glass art. Yixing felt the vast energy in the Sovereign's blood as soon as he circulated the stellar glass art. The astral power contained in that tiny drop of golden blood was as vast as the sea, unfathomable and boundless. With the absorption of the stellar glass art, a large amount of astral power surged out of the Sovereign's blood and was absorbed by Yixing. At the same time, Yixing also used the chaos whole celestial aspect to produce a powerful devouring power to absorb the energy in the Sovereign's blood for his own use. With this two-pronged approach, Yixing's cultivation base stabilized and advanced rapidly, making rapid progress. A 9-star king needed to accumulate a large amount of astral power to become a first nirvana quasi-god. Although Yixing had been a 9-star king for 24 years, he had been going through trials in the star secret realm for 24 years. Therefore his cultivation didn't improve much. He was only in the middle stage of the 9th rank. At this moment Yixing's cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. In just 2 hours he reached the late stage of the 9th rank. Half a day later he reached the peak of the 9th rank. After another day of absorption, Yixing finally touched the limit of the Star Sea realm and felt the barrier of the Star Nirvana realm. The astral power in his body was enough to undergo nirvana. The limit of the Star Sea realm meant that whether it was Yixing's meridians, star vortexes, or even his flesh and blood, they were all filled with astral power. He couldn't absorb any more astral power. Only by undergoing nirvana and undergoing a qualitative change in his body could he absorb more astral power. Yixing stopped absorbing. The stellar glass spell was a supreme divine art, and it had its own nirvana method. It was more thorough and safer than the nirvana method of ordinary divine arts. Nirvana of flesh and blood. Yixing shouted in his heart as he used the nirvana technique. The first 3 nirvanas of the star nirvana realm were all nirvana of the flesh and blood. Then the flesh and blood on Yixing's body, starting from his fingertips and toes, began to shatter into tiny particles. Then they shattered into even tinier leptons, reaching a level that was invisible to the naked eye. Under the observation of the naked eye, the flesh of Yixing's hands and feet gradually shattered and disappeared, leaving only the bones. The process of nirvana was very slow. It was already very dangerous for the body to be crushed into particles. If it was crushed into leptons, it would be even more dangerous. One had to be careful and proceed step by step in an absolutely safe environment. One could not be impatient at all. First the hands, then the legs, then the torso, and finally the head. After an entire day, Yixing's flesh and blood had completely shattered into leptons, invisible to the naked eye. Yixing was only left with bones, but there was a flame in his skull. That was the flame of life. The space between the eyebrows and the sea of consciousness were all hidden in this flame of life. Normally, the flame of life was invisible and traceless, hidden in the flesh and blood. However, when the flesh and blood melted, the flame of life would reveal itself. This flame of life was the source of life for Yixing's flesh and blood. It was because of the flame of life that the leptons could maintain their vitality and reform the body. If someone were to sneak attack at this time and extinguish the flame of life, the leptons would lose their vitality and turn into ashes. The body would be completely destroyed, and without the source of life, the flesh and blood would not be able to regrow. Because of this, the nirvana process required an absolutely safe environment. Yixing's soul force was powerful and his flame of life was exuberant. His flesh and blood leptons were extremely active. With the flame of life as the center, they spread out in all directions, forming a powerful life force field. If someone with great vision focused their mind, they would barely be able to see with the naked eye that the air around the skeleton seemed to distort. This was the trajectory of the life force field. Under the control of the life force field, Yixing's flesh and blood leptons gradually shattered and reformed. The newly formed flesh and blood leptons were much more active than the old ones. Leptons were the smallest form of life. Flesh nirvana was to first turn the flesh and blood into leptons, then gradually nirvana, making the flesh and blood leptons more powerful. Then, the more powerful the flesh and blood leptons would form a body. Naturally, it would have a qualitative breakthrough compared to the previous body because this was a fundamental change. The nirvana process of the flesh and blood leptons lasted for an entire day. Finally, all the flesh and blood leptons had undergone nirvana and began the final step of the nirvana process, the reconstruction of the flesh and blood. The flesh and blood leptons first condensed into flesh and blood particles, and then the flesh and blood particles condensed into flesh and blood, forming different organs or body parts. When the flesh and blood decomposed, it started from the ends of the limbs and ended at the head. The reconstruction of the flesh and blood was the opposite, starting from the head and ending at the ends of the limbs. After a day, Yixing's flesh and blood were completely reconstructed and restored to normal. The entire nirvana process took 3 days. 1 day of decomposition, 1 day of nirvana, and 1 day of reconstruction. Yixing looked exactly the same as he did 3 days ago, but his essence had undergone earth-shaking changes. 3 days ago Yixing was a 9-star king. Now he had successfully undergone nirvana and was a 1-nirvana quasi-god. He had completed the transformation from the star sea realm to the star nirvana realm, turning from a king to a god. The star sea realm and the star nirvana realm were major watersheds in martial arts. A king was still considered a mortal, but a quasi-god had the word god in it and was a god. Yixing's aura had an additional ethereal aura, which was the aura of a god. Yixing could feel the surging vitality and terrifying power in his body. His divine body was built with the supreme-grade imperial body, and it was built with the supreme-grade divine arts nirvana art, so its power was shocking. Although the supreme-grade divine body represented powerful vitality and could be reborn with a drop of blood, the power it contained couldn't be underestimated. If Yixing encountered the iron-winged golden demonic condors in the second stage, he didn't need to use the dark fire Dao arrow. Yixing was sure that he could kill an iron-winged golden demonic condor with just one punch with the terrifying power in his divine body. Yi Xing's gaze fell on the golden blood floating in front of him. The astral energy he had absorbed from the golden blood had already allowed him to undergo nirvana, turning from a 9-star king to a quasi-god. However, the golden blood didn't seem to have shrunk by much. The energy Yi Xing had consumed probably wasn't even 10% of the total amount of the golden blood. The energy contained in a drop of supreme blood is indeed surging. No wonder Senior Xing Chen said that it was enough for me to undergo nirvana several times. That's right, Yi Xing thought to himself. He used the stellar glass art and the chaotic whole cosmic aspect to continue absorbing the blood. Chapter 9:18. The energy contained in a single drop of Sovereign's blood was too vast. In just 7 days, Yi Xing had reached his limit as a first nirvana quasi-god and could undergo a second nirvana. As for the golden blood, it had only shrunk a little, less than 40% of its original size. 3 days later, Yi Xing succeeded in his second nirvana. Half a month later, Yi Xing reached his limit as a second nirvana quasi-god and began his third nirvana. 3 days later, Yi Xing became a third nirvana quasi-god. In a total of about a month, Yi Xing had undergone 3 nirvanas, and his star glass art had advanced to the second level. However, the golden blood had not been completely exhausted. There was still a small drop floating in front of Yi Xing, about 20% of the total. Yi Xing continued to use the star glass art to refine and absorb. 7 days later, he finally absorbed all of the astral energy in the sovereign's blood. Yi Xing's third stage star nirvana cultivation had been greatly consolidated. However, he was still far from undergoing 4 nirvanas. After 4 nirvanas, he would become a mid-tier quasi-god. Moreover, from the 4th nirvana onwards, not only would his flesh undergo nirvana, but his bones would also undergo nirvana. The amount of energy required would naturally be much higher than the previous 3 nirvanas. Yi Xing stood up and felt the surging energy in his body. The vigorous divine energy felt like a dream. A month ago he was only a 9-star king. Now he was a 3rd nirvana quasi-god. This kind of progress was truly inconceivable. Advancing by leaps and bounds was not enough to describe it. All of this was because of a single drop of Sovereign's blood. This allowed Yi Xing to gain a deeper understanding of sovereigns. Sovereigns of the martial Tao were indeed worthy of being called sovereigns. A single drop of blood was already so terrifying. It was unimaginable how powerful their true bodies would be. The space in front of Yi Xing rippled, and the artifact spirit star appeared once more. Senior star. Yi Xing nodded slightly. Very good, very good. You've gone through 3 nirvanas, yet you still have quite a bit of Sovereign's blood left. It can be seen that your attainments in archery are quite good, and your compatibility with the Star Sovereign's blood is very high. Now that you possess the Star Sovereign's bloodline, you can obtain the true inheritance left behind by the Star Sovereign. Yi Xing's eyes lit up. The artifact spirit continued. Star Sovereign left behind 2 secret manuals and 2 treasures for his successor. The 2 manuals are the Sovereign Level Cultivation Technique, Star Glaze Technique, and the Sovereign Level Body Technique, Star Immortal Body. The 2 treasures are the Sovereign Level Talisman Realm Breaker Talisman, and the Sovereign Level Artifact, Star Palace. As soon as it finished speaking, Xing Chen waved its hand and 3 items appeared in front of Yi Xing. 2 jade slips and 1 astral talisman. Yi Xing's heart surged with excitement. The 4 items left behind by the Star Sovereign were all sovereign-level treasures. Even for true gods they were rare treasures. In the Flowing Light Boundary, the Dark Star Divine Palace, the Radiance Divine Palace, and the Star River Divine Palace, these 3 5-star forces could take out a few top-grade divine-grade treasures, but they did not have a single supreme-grade treasure. It was clear how rare supreme-grade treasures were. This was because only sovereigns had sovereign-level treasures. The first 2 jade slips recorded the Star Glaze Technique and the Star Immortal Body. The Astral Talisman was naturally the Realm Breaker Talisman. As for the Star Palace, Yi Xing was currently in the Star Palace. Yi Xing put away the 2 jade slips and the Realm Breaker Talisman. Xing Chen continued, I'll give you the Star Glaze Technique, the Star Immortal Body and the Realm Breaker Talisman. However, you can't take the Star Palace yet. Star Sovereign used the Star Palace as the formation core to set up the Star Secret Realm. You have to cultivate the Star Glaze Technique to level 7 and above before you can take the Star Palace out of the Star Secret Realm. Yi Xing was surprised. Level 7 of the Star Glaze Technique? That's the highest level. Even true gods can't cultivate to level 7. Xing Chen glanced at Yi Xing, who said that the Star Glaze Technique only has level 7? Level 7 is indeed difficult for true gods, but that's only for normal true gods. If you're good enough, true gods can cultivate to level 9. Level 9? The inheritance of Star Glaze spell that Yi Xing had received from real god Tiangong only had 7 levels. He immediately took out the jade slip that recorded Star Glaze spell and used his mental power to scan the contents into his super brain. Xingchen was right. The Star Glaze technique did have 9 levels. The 7th level of the Stellar Glass spell was a top-grade divine grade item. Only the 9th level of the Stellar Glass spell was complete, and its grade was supreme grade. The Stellar Glass spell left behind by Star Sovereign was complete, while true god Tiangong had only obtained an incomplete one. Real god Tiangong cultivated the Star Glaze technique to level 7 and was invincible in the flowing light world. If he cultivated to level 9, his power would be unimaginable. Yi Xing took out the jade slip that recorded the Star Immortal body and scanned the contents into his brain. He was even more shocked. The Star Glaze secret art was a cultivation method, while the Star Immortal body was a body technique. Yi Xing was shocked by its ability to strengthen his body. It was terrifying. The Star Immortal body only had 4 levels. Once cultivated to level 1, the body would be as strong as a middle-grade divine weapon. Level 2, the body would be as strong as a high-grade divine weapon. Level 3, the body would be as strong as a divine weapon. The 4th layer was the highest level. The toughness of the body was even more shocking. It could reach the toughness of a supreme weapon. Yi Xing did not know how strong a supreme weapon was, but he was sure that a real god would not be able to damage it. Yi Xing knew how strong a middle-grade divine weapon was. Without using special methods, a quasi-god below the 7 nirvana would not be able to damage a middle-grade divine weapon. Even a real god would find it difficult to destroy a middle-grade divine weapon. This meant that as long as one cultivated to level 1 of the Star Immortal body, he could stand still and let a quasi-god attack him. His defensive power was insanely strong. In addition, Yi Xing's divine body was a supreme weapon. His vitality was extremely strong. He could be reborn from a drop of blood as soon as he cultivated the divine body. In other words, if his body was damaged until there was only a drop of blood left, he could rebuild his body. If Yi Xing's body was as strong as a middle-grade divine weapon, who could destroy it until there was only a drop of blood left? By then, even a real god would not be able to kill him. As for the boundary-breaking talisman as a supreme treasure, it must have an extremely heaven-defying function. From its name, Yi Xing could see the function of the boundary-breaking talisman. It should be able to bring people through the space between realms, just like how the great space-breaking talisman could bring people through the space of the starry sky continent. The artifact spirit said, "You have obtained the Star Sovereign's inheritance. If others knew about it, you would be killed for sure. Countless true gods would want to kill you and steal your treasures." Therefore, the Star Sovereign had left behind a will that whoever obtains his inheritance must cultivate the Star Immortal body to the 1st level in order to leave the Star Secret Realm. That way you would be able to protect yourself even when facing true gods. Furthermore, in order to avoid death, he had also left you with the Breaking Boundary Talisman. The Breaking Boundary Talisman can take you to another realm and save you from a life-threatening danger. Chapter 924. In this round, Yi Xing's opponent was Li Xingwu, a Quasi-God 6 Nirvana. Quasi-God 6 Nirvana was the highest level of cultivation among the core disciples. Of all the core disciples in the Dark Star Divine Hall, there were only 6 Quasi-God 6 Nirvana. In this battle, Yi Xing's arena was still the focus of everyone's attention. In the previous battles, Yi Xing had won very easily and had not shown the limits of his strength. But in this battle, his opponent was Li Xingwu, a Quasi-God 6 Nirvana. Everyone guessed that Yi Xing would be in for a tough battle against such a powerful opponent, and the limits of his strength would be exposed. Even so, it was still unknown whether Yi Xing could win this battle and enter the top 8. Unfortunately, everyone's guess was once again completely wrong. Yi Xing and Li Xingwu's battle was not as tough as they had expected. Yi Xing used the medial quality divine weapon, the Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow, and used the Ashen Flame Void Annihilating Arrow art to break through Li Xingwu's attack with 1 arrow, break through Li Xingwu's defense with 2 arrows, and send Li Xingwu flying with the 3rd arrow, spraying blood across the sky. Yi Xing won and easily at that, defeating his opponent with 3 arrows. This result was beyond everyone's expectations, and they were all dumbfounded. Yi Xing's strength was not just on par with Quasi-God 6 Nirvana, it was far superior. High in the clouds, the Dark Star Emperor's expression turned unsightly. He had organized the strongest core disciple competition not to know Yi Xing's strength, but Yi Xing's vitality. However, the strength of one's vitality was not as easy to determine as one's cultivation. If the Dark Star Emperor wanted to know Yi Xing's vitality, he would have to see how Yi Xing recovered from his injuries. Moreover, this was not something that could be determined by a small injury. It had to be a serious injury. But up until now, Yi Xing had entered the top 8, and yet he had not been injured in the slightest. Moreover, not only was he completely unscathed, but he had also completely crushed his opponents. Even Quasi-God 6 Nirvana opponents were no exception. If Yi Xing hadn't been injured, this competition would have been held in vain. How could the Dark Star Emperor be happy? Gao Man stood beside the Dark Star Emperor and knew what he was thinking just by looking at the Dark Star Emperor's expression. Soon the battles in the other arenas also ended. The top 8 had been decided, and the inner court deacons quickly arranged the list of participants for the next round. 4 more arenas were taken away. In this round, Yi Xing's opponent was another quasi-god of 6th Nirvana. However, it was not one of the 3 people who were much stronger than ordinary quasi-gods of 6th Nirvana, such as Shui Baotong, Gu Kaiyang, or Su Qianni. The strength of the opponent in this round was about the same as Li Xingwu. Yi Xing used the Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow and executed the Grey Flame Void Annihilation Arrow technique, easily obtaining victory and entering the top 4. Shui Baotong, Gu Kaiyang, and Su Qianni were indeed geniuses who could fight above their level in the quasi-god realm. They also defeated their opponents and entered the top 4. The next round would be the semi-finals of the top 4. 2 more arenas were taken away. Arena number 1, Shui Baotong vs Su Qianni. Arena number 2, Yi Xing vs Gu Kaiyang. The inner court deacons quickly arranged the list of participants and announced it. Shui Baotong glared at Yi Xing and entered arena number 1 with Su Qianni. Yi Xing also glanced at Shui Baotong and entered arena number 2 with Gu Kaiyang. 45 years ago, when Yi Xing broke through to the 9-star king level and went to the heavenly Bao continent, he was intercepted by Shui Baotong and exposed his supreme astrology, which was discovered by the Dark Star Emperor. This year's strongest core disciple competition was a rare opportunity to vent his anger on Shui Baotong, but he didn't encounter it. Even in the semi-finals of the top 2, they were not assigned to the same arena. Was a pity? Shui Baotong's mentality was similar. He was extremely confident in his own strength. Even if Yi Xing's performance was extremely heaven-defying, he still had enough confidence to defeat Yi Xing. He couldn't wait to enter the same arena with Yi Xing and beat Yi Xing up. Both of them wanted to beat the other up, and this dream had come true. In the semi-finals, Shui Baotong and Yi Xing both won. Shui Baotong and Su Qianni's strength was similar. The two of them exchanged more than 100 moves before Shui Baotong seized the opportunity to defeat Su Qianni. Yi Xing and Gu Kaiyang's battle was about the same. Gu Kaiyang's strength was much stronger than Li Xingwu's. Yi Xing didn't use any new trump cards, still using the Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow, the Azure Flame Void Annihilation Arrow Art, and the Vermilion Astrology. Then, with the help of the Wind Shadow Divine Evasion Technique Speed, he defeated Gu Kaiyang with great difficulty. Shui Baotong and Yi Xing both won with great difficulty. Everyone judged that their strength should be about the same. In this final battle, it wouldn't be easy to determine the winner. However, the Dark Star Emperor was very clear in his heart. Yi Xing had the supreme astrology, but his true strength hadn't been revealed yet. Although the Dark Star Emperor's expression was ugly, he wasn't completely helpless. He looked at Gao Man. Gao Man received the signal and said loudly, "The strongest core disciple competition is about to usher in the final battle. The winner will be the strongest core disciple and will receive the Divine Emperor's Nirvana Divine Pill as a reward. Such an important battle naturally can't be missed. The Divine Emperor has decided that the final battle will be held in 2 hours. In these 2 hours, the two of them will have a good rest, recover their energy, and face the final battle in their best condition. Moreover, the final battle is related to the Nirvana Divine Pill and cannot be easily decided. The Divine Emperor has given special permission that the final battle can be held without any rules. It can be a life and death battle without any scruples." Everyone was shocked when they heard this. The final battle could be held without any rules. It meant that even if one of them killed the other in the final battle, it would be under the Divine Emperor's orders and wouldn't be punished by the palace's rules. Everyone could already smell the smoke of the final battle. Hearing this, Shui Baotong's eyes lit up with joy. He had always wanted to kill Yi Xing. Now, with the Divine Emperor's order, he could finally kill Yi Xing in the competition. His heart was filled with joy. As for Yi Xing, he was also filled with killing intent. Since the Dark Star Emperor had given the order, he didn't have any scruples. He could use this opportunity to take revenge. After Gao Man gave the Divine Emperor's order, he disappeared. Then the inner court elder Shui Yinan also disappeared from his seat. Not long after, Gao Man returned to the Dark Star Emperor's side. Shui Baotong was summoned by Shui Yinan and disappeared from everyone's sight. Yi Xing frowned slightly, thinking that Shui Baotong would definitely play some tricks. He immediately activated his void-piercing divine eyes and looked at Shui Yinan and Shui Baotong. Shui Yinan first took out a high-grade divine weapon and gave it to Shui Baotong. Then he took out a mid-grade divine armor and a short spear that shone brightly. It was a divine-level forbidden weapon that contained terrifying power. Shui Yinan said to Shui Baotong, "The Divine Emperor's order is for you to use the Qi Long divine armor to protect yourself. First, use the high-grade divine weapon to injure Yi Xing. If you can't, use the forbidden weapon, the bloodthirsty divine spear. Do you remember?" Chapter 928. Celestial Cloud Palace, a quiet room at the back of the palace. Yi Xing calmed his mind, took out the Nirvana divine pill and swallowed it. The surging medicinal power was quickly absorbed by Yi Xing. His limbs, bones, flesh and blood were all strengthened by the medicinal power of the Nirvana divine pill. Yi Xing's quasi-god third Nirvana cultivation base grew stronger and stronger. When the pill entered the body, the medicinal power would automatically spread, and absorption was much faster than refining the sovereign's blood. In less than an hour, Yi Xing's cultivation base had already stabilized to the limit of quasi-god third Nirvana. There was still a large amount of medicinal power in his body, enough for him to undergo the fourth Nirvana. Starting from the ends of his limbs, Yi Xing's flesh began to shatter. This time it was not only his flesh that underwent Nirvana, but also his bones. First, his flesh and blood shattered into life particles, and then into life leptons invisible to the naked eye. Only his bones were left. Then his bones also began to shatter from the ends of his limbs. This time, because his bones were also shattered, the speed of his divine body shattering was much slower than the previous 3 Nirvanas. It took a full 2 days to complete the shattering. Yi Xing's body had completely disappeared, and even his bones did not exist. Only a flame of life was left floating in the void, representing that Yi Xing's life had not been extinguished. Yi Xing's flesh, blood and bones had all turned into life leptons. With the flame of life as the center, the life leptons formed a life force field, constantly shattering and reforming, undergoing Nirvana. With the addition of the bones undergoing Nirvana, the Nirvana process this time took longer than the previous 3 Nirvanas, lasting for 2 days. 2 days later, all the life leptons were reborn, and the Nirvana rebirth began. The third step, the reconstruction of the body. First was the reconstruction of the skull, then the bones of the body and finally the bones of the limbs. The reconstruction of the bones of the entire body was complete, and compared to before the Nirvana, there was a layer of luster. Whether it was density or strength, there was a qualitative change. Then the reconstruction of the flesh began. First it was the head, then the body and finally the limbs. The whole process took another 2 days. After a total of 6 days, Yi Xing's fourth Nirvana was completely completed. His godly spirit aura had undergone a qualitative upgrade, and he was now a quasi-god of Nirvana. This was a breakthrough from a beginner quasi-god to a mid-tier quasi-god. Outside the quiet room, the Dark Star Emperor had been using the surveillance formation to observe every movement in the quiet room. As Yi Xing's Nirvana neared, the Dark Star Emperor became happier and happier. When he saw that Yi Xing had completed his Nirvana, the Dark Star Emperor's joy reached its peak. He was extremely excited and his eyes were filled with desire. It was as if hope was right in front of him, and he could grab it with a stretch of his hand. Ha 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 ha. The Dark Star Emperor couldn't contain his joy and laughed heartily. It was as if he could see the scene of him becoming a supreme being. At that time he would not only be the divine emperor of a country, but also the lord of a realm. He would be a supreme existence that could traverse countless realms. Amidst his laughter, the Dark Star Emperor entered the quiet room. At this moment, the Dark Star Emperor no longer concealed his inner thoughts. He looked at Yi Xing with a gaze that revealed his desire and ruthlessness. In the eyes of the Dark Star Emperor, Yi Xing was a turtle in a jar, a little lamb waiting to be slaughtered. There was no room for resistance. Even if Yi Xing's strength had reached the level of a true god, the Dark Star Emperor didn't care. He was a 10-star true god. He didn't even care about Kyuhoshi, let alone ordinary 1-star, 2-star and 3-star true gods. He could casually pinch them to death with a stretch of his hand. Yixing's gaze also looked at the Dark Star Emperor. It was also different from before. He knew that the success of his nirvana was the time for the Dark Star Emperor to tear off his mask. There was no need for him to continue to be respectful to the Dark Star Emperor. Yixing also didn't treat someone who wanted to snatch his supreme astral form as his master. Instead, he treated him as a mortal enemy. Yixing's consciousness was connected to the boundary-breaking talisman. His divine power wrapped around the boundary-breaking talisman. He could leave at any time with a thought. Therefore, Yixing didn't feel the slightest bit nervous when looking at the Dark Star Emperor. Yixing's lips curled into a smile. Dark Star Emperor, you've finally torn off your mask and are going to make a move on me? The Dark Star Emperor's expression was surprised. There was something wrong with the development of this plot. His gaze had so blatantly expressed his thoughts. Yixing should be surprised, puzzled, scared, puzzled, and so on. Why did he have such a confident and omniscient look? The Dark Star Emperor was shocked. How do you know what I'm going to do to you? Yixing chuckled. You're just after my supreme astral form, aren't you? You want to transfer my supreme astral form into your body so that you can use it to become a supreme being. The Dark Star Emperor's heart trembled. From what Yixing said, it seemed that Yixing even knew that he had the astral form diversion technique. You really know a lot. The Dark Star Emperor's expression quickly returned to normal. He sneered. However, even if you know, what's the use? You've been under my surveillance all this time and have nowhere to run. Now you're like a turtle in a jar. What power do you have to resist? The Dark Star Emperor's smile gradually turned sinister. If you don't know, you'll feel better for a while. Now that you know, won't every day be like a year? Won't your heart be filled with pain and only despair? Yixing smiled. His expression was calm. Your Excellency Divine Emperor, do I look like I'm in pain and filled with despair? The Dark Star Emperor stopped smiling. His gaze was like an arrow as he stared at Yixing. It was as if he wanted to see through Yixing. Could it be that you can still escape from the palm of my hand? Yixing smiled mysteriously. Divine Emperor, don't look at me. I'm someone who has entered the Star Secret Realm. How can you understand the methods of a Star Supreme? Hearing this, the Dark Star Emperor's expression changed greatly. Yixing's expression was too confident. He was starting to believe that Yixing had indeed obtained some kind of escape treasure in the Star Secret Realm. Whoosh, the Dark Star Emperor spread out his 5 fingers. 5 streaks of godly power shot out, turning into 5 divine dragons that charged towards Yixing. The space in the quiet room instantly froze. The power of space imprisonment was much more terrifying than Yixing's power. Even an ordinary true god wouldn't be able to move. The Dark Star Emperor's attack was as fast as lightning. He wanted to capture Yixing. In the blink of an eye, the 5 divine dragons had tightly bound Yixing. If Yixing had any methods, he wouldn't be able to use them at all. However, Yixing was already prepared. He didn't need to use the boundary-breaking talisman at all. He only needed to think about it. No matter how powerful the Dark Star Emperor was, he wouldn't be able to stop Yixing from thinking about it. In the blink of an eye, the boundary-breaking talisman was activated. A bright ray of light instantly shot out from Yixing's body, breaking through the obstruction of space and shooting towards the sky. The 5 divine dragons that were coiling around Yixing's body instantly shattered. Yixing's figure instantly disappeared along with the ray of light. The Dark Star Emperor was shocked. He immediately shuttled through the void and chased after the ray of light. However, in the blink of an eye, he lost track of Yixing. Chapter 931. Yixing looked at True God Wujiu curiously. Black-yellow spiritual energy? What is that? True God Wujiu said, Black-yellow spiritual energy is the origin energy of the world when the universe was first created. It is the origin of all the great Daos of the universe. A wisp of black-yellow spiritual energy is enough for me to reach the middle stage of the Star God realm from the early stage. Quasi-gods were at the Star Nirvana realm, and the Star God realm was the True God realm. True God Wujiu's voice was filled with anticipation, and his eyes were full of hope. It was obvious that he longed for the black-yellow spiritual energy. According to True God Wujiu, the black-yellow spiritual energy was the best treasure for warriors to cultivate. It was extremely effective for both quasi-gods and true gods. Yixing was also tempted by the black-yellow spiritual energy. Yixing asked, Big brother, since you have heard that the black-yellow spiritual energy has appeared in the silver star boundary, why don't you go and take a look? True God Wuxia shook his head. The black-yellow spiritual energy is located in the black-yellow space. In the black-yellow space the universe is not yet formed, and the space is chaotic. There are space cracks everywhere and there are even space storms. For a one-star true god like me, there is a high chance of death. Moreover, many two-star true gods and three-star true gods of the star origin continent have entered the black-yellow space because of the black-yellow spiritual energy. The number one expert, the sect master of the Golden Cauldron Divine Sect, even brought along the Golden Cauldron Divine Sect's most precious treasure, the primeval Chaos Golden Cauldron there. Moreover, I have heard that the true god experts of the Milky Way continent have also gone there. The Milky Way continent even has Kyohoshi. If a one-star true god like me were to enter the black-yellow space, not to mention the dangers of the black-yellow space, even if I were to encounter other true god experts, I would still be dead. I can't go. In terms of strength, Yi Xing was confident that he was stronger than a one-star true god. In terms of physical strength and vitality he was far superior. Moreover, his speed was unparalleled, and he was not inferior to a true god expert. Yi Xing felt that perhaps he could enter the black-yellow space and try his luck. Yi Xing smiled. I wonder where the mysterious yellow space is located? Real God Wuxia said, the mysterious yellow space is ethereal and without a trace. It is not fixed at a certain place. Instead, it moves around the silver star boundary. However, if you want to find it, it is not impossible to find it. The mysterious yellow spiritual energy is extremely pure and it is the origin of all things. As long as you are near the mysterious yellow space, you will definitely be able to feel the aura of the mysterious yellow spiritual energy. Then you will be able to find the specific location of the mysterious yellow space through the aura of the mysterious yellow spiritual energy. After saying that, real God Wuxia waved his hand and shook his head. It's useless to say all these. I can't enter the mysterious yellow space and neither can you. Let's talk about something more practical. Is there anything that you want in the Xingshen auction 3 days later? Although Wu Jiuzhen thought highly of Yi Xing and believed that Yi Xing was a top quasi-god, he didn't compare Yi Xing to a true god. Yi Xing chuckled. Naturally, he wouldn't say that he wanted to go to the mysterious yellow space. For the auction 3 days later, I only want the divine feather green gold. It doesn't conflict with what you want, right? Real God Wuxia was slightly surprised and said, the divine feather green gold is a high-grade divine level material. It is very expensive. Unless you sell the only high-grade divine weapon you have, how can you afford it? What you want is the healing divine pill, the regeneration creation pill? Yi Xing was only a 4 Nirvana quasi-god. As for the divine feather green gold, it was a treasure that even true god experts would fight over. Real God Wuxia was very doubtful whether Yi Xing had enough money to buy it. Yi Xing was happy that it didn't conflict with what real God Wuxia wanted. He said, other than the divine feather green gold, I am not interested in the other auction items. Brother, why don't we go to the auction together 3 days later? True God Wuxia found it harder and harder to see through Yi Xing's depth. He only felt that Yi Xing had extraordinary potential. True God Wuxia was only an ordinary one-star true god. He was very satisfied to be friends with a quasi-god with great potential. This meant that he might have a true god as a friend in the future. Okay, we will go to the auction together 3 days later. I have a VIP card. You can enter with a ticket at that time and just follow me in. True God Wuxia patted his chest and agreed. Although he was only an ordinary one-star true god, he was still a true god. He was an existence that stood at the pinnacle of martial arts in the Xingyuan continent. There were less than 100 true gods in the entire Xingyuan continent. He was one of them. His status was naturally respected and he was a VIP at the auction. 3 days later, Yi Xing and true god Wuxia arrived at the Xingshuan auction house. The staff at the auction house respectfully welcomed true god Wuxia inside. As a true god VIP, he naturally had the right to bring others in. Yi Xing and true god Wuxia walked side by side. They were also respectfully received by the staff at the auction house. The Xingshuan auction house was held once every 1,000 years. The scale was huge. A king could only attend the auction once in their lifetime. Moreover, they did not have the right to enter. Even a quasi-god's lifespan was limited. They could only attend a few auctions. True god experts, on the other hand, had a lifespan of 30,000 years. They could attend many auctions. Therefore, every true god expert had their own VIP room. True God Wuxia's VIP room number was 087. For the Xingyuan continent, where there were less than 100 true gods, the number 087 was really at the back. True God Wu Jiu brought Yi Xing into VIP room 087. Although it was ranked towards the back, the facilities inside were not simple and crude. Instead, they were extremely luxurious. Furthermore, there were 4 beautiful female king maids who were dressed in alluring attire that could captivate one's mind. Lord True God. True God Wu Jiu and Yi Xing had just sat down when the 4 maids approached them in pairs. One of them massaged their legs while the other massaged their shoulders. From the VIP rooms, one could see the scene in the auction hall through the projection of an array. The auction hall was an extremely large space. It was over 1,000 meters long and wide. There were over 10,000 seats inside. Each seat took up a large space. It was not crowded, but it could not compare to the luxury of the VIP rooms. Although quasi-gods and true gods were both gods, there was an almost insurmountable gap between the two. Their statuses were on completely different levels. The Xingxuan auction house was held once every 1,000 years. Quasi-gods could only attend it a few times in their lifetime. Therefore, every time it was held, the auction would be very lively. Although the true gods in the VIP rooms could bring some quasi-gods in, the ordinary seats in the auction hall were all sold out. As quasi-gods entered one after another, the auction hall was soon filled with people. The Xingxuan auction house had officially begun. In an auction, the more important an item was, the more it would be put at the end of the auction. Divine feather green gold, as a high-grade divine-level material, was abnormally precious. It would definitely be put at the end of the auction. Yi Xing narrowed his eyes. He had already seen the auction brochure. If the divine feather green gold did not appear, Yi Xing would not be interested. True God Wu Jiu, on the other hand, was paying attention to the auction process. Apart from the regeneration creation pill, he also had his eyes on 2 middle-grade divine-level treasures. 4 middle-grade divine-level treasures, quasi-gods competed more than true gods. When True God Wu Jiu made his move, others, including the true gods in the VIP rooms, did not compete too fiercely with True God Wu Jiu. The 2 middle-grade divine-level treasures that they wanted both ended up in True God Wu Jiu's hands. Chapter 939. As soon as real God Zhuanan came out of the dimensional void, he felt a strong murderous intent shrouding him. His heart trembled as he sensed the danger of death. Flame Millstone Protection. Real God Zhuanan immediately unleashed a defensive move. He used his gloves, which were top-grade divine weapons, and a millstone-like flaming palm energy covered his entire body. At the same time, he activated his divine power and formed a strong defensive shield. Previously, Real God Zhuanan had blocked the arrows that Yi Xing had shot out with such a defense. Real God Zhuanan already knew that Real God Ji Cheng was following the aura that he had left behind and would catch up with him soon. Real God Ji Cheng was one of the top 3 Real God elders in the Golden Cauldron Divine Sect. His fighting power was at the 3-star level. As long as he could stall Yi Xing for 10 breaths of time, Real God Ji Cheng would naturally be able to kill the arrow god when he arrived. Real God Zhuanan's plan was correct. However, he had not expected Yi Xing to be so much stronger than he had been outside Xingxian City. The dark fire path arrow instantly shot into the flaming millstone-like palm strength and penetrated it easily. Then it penetrated the divine power shield. Its power was still strong and it shot into Real God Zhuanan's divine body. A real god's divine body had much stronger vitality than a quasi-god's divine body. At the very least, it was at the level of blood rebirth. Moreover, the sturdiness of a divine body was much higher than that of a quasi-god's divine body. However, Real God Zhuanan's divine body cracked when he was hit by the dark fire arrow. Especially at the spot where the arrow had hit, there was a bowl-sized hole. Moreover, the flesh at the edge of the hole was quickly disintegrating and turning into life particles. It had reached a stage where the flesh could not be reborn. If it was a disintegrated wound or flesh, it could be reborn. To a real god, such an injury was not considered an injury. There was no need to consume life force as the flesh could heal itself. However, if the flesh was disintegrated into life entropy and could not heal itself, it would have to consume life force to regenerate the flesh. Such an injury would damage life force. If this kind of damage was severe enough, it would consume a lot of vitality. When it reached a certain level, even the god body that had been regenerated from a drop of blood would lose its life. Regardless of whether it was the attributes of the silver dragon heaven shooting bow or the power of the divine ability itself, they all had extremely terrifying lethality. They were extremely destructive to one's vitality. When combined together, it was a devastating blow to a true god. In the blink of an eye, real God Zhuanan felt that he had lost more than 50% of his vitality. Supreme Astral Form, Supreme Grade Divine Bow. Only then did true God Zhuanan realize that Yixing's astrology and divine weapons had changed. He was greatly alarmed. Coupled with the fact that his life force was rapidly fading away, he could feel the aura of death. His heart was filled with fear. Whoosh! Yixing shot out another arrow. This time it was the Wind Fire Dao arrow. The speed of the Wind and Fire Dao arrow was even faster. Before real God Zhuanan could fully recover from the injuries he had suffered from the Dark Fire Dao arrow, the Wind and Fire Dao arrow had already entered his body. It was so fast that real God Zhuanan, who was severely injured, couldn't react in time. Real God Zhuanan let out a blood-curdling scream. This time, his divine body completely disintegrated. In a breath's time, his body had completely disintegrated into particles of life and scattered in all directions. A true God's life had fallen just like that. The Supreme Grade Divine Bow combined with the Divine Valor Archery Dao arrow had terrifying lethality. Yixing was only a 4 Nirvana quasi-god and couldn't unleash the full power of the bow. However, he had still killed real God Zhuanan with 2 arrows. If Yixing's cultivation was higher and he could unleash the full power of the Supreme Grade Divine Bow and Divine Ability, he would have been able to easily kill an ordinary true god. Yixing could sense that the expert chasing after him was getting closer and closer. He used the Divine Eye of Void Breaker and saw the figure of the other party. This was an expert who was much stronger than real God Zhuanan. Yixing waved his hand and grabbed real God Zhuanan's relic. Then he continued to teleport through the void. In less than 10 breaths' time, real God Jiqing appeared at the place where real God Zhuanan had fallen. He opened his Divine Eye of Martial Arts and could see the disintegrated particles of life that had yet to completely dissipate. He couldn't sense real God Zhuanan's aura of life anymore. It was obvious that real God Zhuanan had fallen. Real God Jiqing was both furious and surprised. Although real God Zhuanan was only a 1-star real god, he was still a real god. Even if he were to attack, it would be easy to defeat real God Zhuanan but difficult to kill him. Who could actually kill real God Zhuanan in such a short period of time? Although real God Jiqing didn't think that he could kill real God Zhuanan in such a short period of time, he still locked onto real God Zhuanan with his mind and teleported along the space ripples. From real God Jiqing's point of view, if the other party was really powerful, there was no need for him to escape. If he could kill real God Zhuanan so quickly, he should have a treasure with great lethality. As for him, he was a 3-star real god. Some of the treasures with great lethality could kill a 1-star real god, but they might not be able to deal with a 2-star real god, let alone a 3-star real god. After all, no matter how great the lethality was, it would only be effective if it hit the target. In front of a true expert, no matter how great the lethality of the treasure was, as long as it wasn't powerful enough, it would be useless. After killing one, there's another. He's really persistent. The speed of this person's teleportation is even faster than real God Zhuanan's. It's even faster than mine. If I continue to chase like this, he'll catch up with me sooner or later. Yixing was in a bad mood. Originally, he wanted to kill real God Zhuanan quickly so that he could escape. However, he didn't expect that the expert chasing after him would have such great mental strength. Although he was still far away, he had already locked onto his mind. Plus, after teleporting, the space ripples in the void wouldn't disappear instantly. The other party could follow the space ripples and chase after him. Qing Yun wings could increase one's movement speed greatly, but it didn't have much effect on teleportation. The reason why his teleportation speed was so fast was because of the penetrating power of arrow essence. That was why he was faster than an ordinary real god. In order to avoid being chased by the other party, Yixing shuttled through the space barrier continuously. Sometimes he would enter the starry sky continent. Sometimes he would enter the boundless void. He shuttled between different spaces. When he wasn't in the same space, it was much more difficult to lock onto his mind. However, the other party could still catch up with him through the space ripples. However, in that case, the other party had to follow the path that Yixing took when he shuttled through the void. The distance that Yixing could teleport was the same as the distance that the other party could chase after. Only then could they find the next space ripple. In that case, the speed of the other party slowed down. The two of them, one running and one chasing, shuttled through more than 10 starry sky continents continuously. When Yixing shuttled through the boundless void again, he suddenly felt a weak but extremely pure star spiritual energy. This is? Yixing's heart jumped and he instantly recalled what real God Wujiao had said. Chapter 944. Clang. Yi Xing's body shot through the air like a cannonball, traveling tens of thousands of li in an instant. Yi Xing was well aware of the Chaos Golden Cauldron's approach. Since he couldn't avoid it, he naturally had to use the force of this collision to flee. His divine body was even tougher than a medial-quality divine weapon, so he wasn't afraid of the opponent's attack. Thus he didn't try to block it. Instead, he used the force of the collision to charge forward, instantly pulling away from True God Jineo. However, the Chaos Golden Cauldron's collision was truly frightening, and most importantly it was also very profound. Even though Yi Xing's divine body was heaven-defying in defense, he still couldn't help but suffer some wounds that were deep enough to see bone and spurt blood. Wherever he passed, he left behind a long trail of blood that spilled for tens of thousands of li. However, Yi Xing's vitality was at the blood rebirth level. As long as his divine body had a single drop of blood left, he could be reborn. Although he had lost a lot of blood, his divine body was still there, and he still had a lot of divine blood in his body, so his injuries weren't that serious. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xing's injuries were healed, and he hadn't even consumed 1/10 of his vitality. From the moment Yi Xing was attacked by Quasi-God 7 Nirvana's arrow to being sent flying by True God Jineo's Chaos Golden Cauldron, only the blink of an eye had passed. Yi Xing suffered continuous attacks. Although he was injured, he did not fall into an encirclement and continued to flee. Whether it was the Quasi-God 7 Nirvana Archer or the 4-star True God Sect Master Jineo, they were both shocked. A mere Quasi-God 4 Nirvana actually had such a powerful defense? Wasn't this divine body a little too heaven-defying? After being sent flying several hundred li by the Chaos Golden Cauldron, Yi Xing immediately changed directions and fled in the same direction as Quasi-God 7 Nirvana. Although changing directions allowed him to close the distance between him and True God Jineo, True God Jineo's speed wasn't enough to stop Yi Xing. At this moment, Quasi-God 7 Nirvana's archer fired another arrow. This golden arrow was like a divine spear that was 100 li long, traveling 100,000 li in a second. This person's arrow had been split into 9 in order to intercept Yi Xing, and he had succeeded. But now Yi Xing was running in the opposite direction. If he wanted to stop Yi Xing, he would first have to shoot the arrow in front of Yi Xing, then change direction and shoot at Yi Xing. With his attainments in archery, it wasn't impossible, but Yi Xing's speed was too fast. If it was an ordinary true god who could travel 10 to 20,000 miles in a breath, he would definitely be able to circle around and intercept the arrow. However, Yi Xing could travel tens of thousands of miles in a breath. By the time his arrow reached the front, Yi Xing would have enough time to dodge, so there was no way he could intercept it. Therefore he simply condensed his power and unleashed an extremely fast and powerful attack, hoping to kill him in one strike. No matter how fast Yi Xing was, he was not faster than this arrow. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xing was shot again. However, this time the arrow was shot from behind. Yi Xing was hit by the arrow, and the impact of the arrow's power made him even faster. And although this arrow was powerful, it had not reached the level of a quasi-god 4 nirvanas, so the damage it could do to Yi Xing was limited. It only left a fist-sized hole in Yi Xing's divine body, which healed in the blink of an eye. True God Jin Ao and Quasi-God 7 Nirvana's archer pushed their speed to the limit as they chased after Yi Xing. The other true gods also caught up, but they were clearly much slower than the two. Sect Master Jin Ding. Young Master Tian Yuan. True God Jin Ao and Quasi-God 7 Nirvana's archer were clearly familiar with each other, and they greeted each other. The Sky Origin Divine Sect was a faction of the Milky Way continent, and one of the top factions. The standard of martial arts in the Milky Way continent was higher than in the Star Origin continent, and it could be compared to the Dark Star continent. As one of the top factions, the Sky Origin Divine Sect was much stronger than the Golden Cauldron Divine Sect. The sect master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect had only become a true god after 8 nirvanas. He was called Kyuhoshi and he was close to 30,000 years old. His lifespan was approaching and he only had 1 or 2,000 years left. The young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect was not the son of the sect master, but the disciple of the Sky Origin Divine Sect's sect master. He was the number 1 genius of the Sky Origin Divine Sect after the current sect master. He had an 8-star blue fate and he would be able to experience 8 nirvanas in the future. He had a chance to become Kyuhoshi, and he had already been designated as the young sect master. Once the sect master's lifespan was up, he would take over the position. Although the young master's current strength was not on par with True God Jin Ao's, his prospects were much better than True God Jin Ao's. As such, true God Jinao, the #1 expert of the star origin continent, was very humble in front of the young master. True God Jinao chased after Yi Xing and said, "Young Master Tian Yuan, if you catch the arrow god, I only want his life, and the black and yellow spiritual energy will be yours." This was the time to express his attitude. If the young master did not exist, true God Jinao would have been able to refine the black and yellow spiritual energy and become a 5-star true god. However, even if he became a 5-star true god, he would not be able to fight against the Sky Origin Divine Sect. Therefore, once the young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect arrived, even if he snatched the black and yellow spiritual energy, it would be useless. Instead, he would lose his life. Therefore, he had to express his attitude early to prevent the young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect from misunderstanding. The young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect and true God Jinao snorted coldly, and a look of disdain appeared on his arrogant face. "Arrow God? You dare to use such a title? Aren't you afraid of biting your tongue? Fine, his life is yours and the black and yellow spiritual energy is mine." As he spoke, the young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect shot out another arrow. The golden arrow was like a divine spear, and in a breath's time, it caught up to Yi Xing. Yi Xing did not waste time dodging. He allowed the arrow to hit him, increasing his speed and increasing the distance between him and the young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect. The young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect wanted to attack Yi Xing with another arrow, but he could no longer do so. True God Jinao said, "Our sect has a 3-star true god guarding the entrance and exit of the Bound of Universe. Arrow God won't be able to escape. With our forces surrounding him, no matter how fast he is, he will eventually fall into our hands." The young master of the Sky Origin Divine Sect nodded. He took out the speed communication pearl and informed the other true gods of the Sky Origin Divine Sect to surround Huang Xiaolong. True God Jinao had the true gods of the Golden Cauldron Divine Sect circle around to the side. Unless Yi Xing went straight ahead, if he wanted to turn left or right, he would definitely be blocked by the true gods of both sides. Not to mention the fact that the black and yellow space had an end, it was impossible to keep going forward. Even the spatial storms that frequently appeared in the black and yellow space would have to make way for them. Therefore they could not keep going forward. Moreover, the Golden Cauldron Divine Sect and the Sky Origin Divine Sect were top forces in their respective continents. They had a lot of power and had many allies. There were also many true gods of other sects that obeyed their orders and assisted in hunting down Yi Xing. Yi Xing had the black and yellow spiritual energy on him. This plaything was a treasure, but it was also a taunting halo. In fact, there was no need for the Golden Cauldron Divine Sect and the Sky Origin Divine Sect to mobilize. As long as the other true gods knew that the black and yellow spiritual energy was on Yi Xing, they would automatically join in the battle to surround Yi Xing. Now, Yi Xing was like the black and yellow spiritual energy, surrounded and chased by a large number of true gods. However, the black and yellow spiritual energy did not have spirituality, while Yi Xing had consciousness. Moreover, Yi Xing had the god eye of Void Breaker. When he looked around, his line of sight was stronger than other true gods. Although there were many true gods surrounding him, he was able to escape from the encirclement several times. As the true gods of the black and yellow space gradually knew that the black and yellow spiritual energy was on Yi Xing, more and more true gods surrounded Yi Xing. It was harder for him to break out. "I'll go all out today. There will be an update tonight." Begging for monthly votes and recommendation votes. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.